Hi, everyone. I am Emily Walker. First off, just thank you for being here today. We're really excited to go through our CMDB Data Foundations workshop with you all. So, quick intro. Again, Emily Walker. I lead one of our solution consulting teams here at ServiceNow, supporting our mid-market segment. So, fun fact, I was actually a solution consultant specializing in our IT operations management solution that really helps power up the CMDB. So this workshop is kind of really near and dear to my heart. I remember being a brand new solution consultant and running these workshops and seeing a lot of success for our customers or folks that are interested in kind of taking that first step with ServiceNow and really helping to build out data foundations within the platform. So I will be your MC today. We have a couple other folks on the line. We have three main presenters, and then we kind of have a man behind the scenes who is one of our other solution consultants that has really been kind of helping us build this workshop. And so I'm going to turn it over to him. He'll kind of be in the background answering questions, but I wanted to give him a minute to introduce himself. So, Michael.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Michael Blazer. I was a customer for 7 years. I came from the operations management world, and we had problems with operations management, not because of our operations capabilities, but because of the data we were getting down. So I moved to the service management side of the house, implemented a CMDB with the common service data model, and found the biggest problem was people and process. It was rarely technology. ServiceNow has done a lot to provide tools and capabilities that allow you to govern effectively and to get the right people in place to be able to help co-manage this and drive outcomes utilizing the CMDB data. And so this workshop is near and dear to my heart. I started working on it the moment I got here 4.5 years ago, and I'm really excited for this team to be able to bring it to you. Hopefully, you guys love the content and looking forward to the questions and engagement.
Thanks, Michael. All right, so couple of webinar logistics here. With Zoom, you'll see that there is a Q&A button down there. That's where we're going to ask each of you if you have questions, and please ask as many questions as you can today. This session is really meant to be the most so that you can get the most out of it. But please keep questions to that Q&A panel. Second, any conversations, the guys are going to do a really good job of trying to keep this as interactive as possible, at least as much as we can for a webinar. So keep those conversations in the chat. That's where we will make it a lot more interactive there. Next, the webinar is recorded and we have built out a digital sales room. So this is where you will find the recording, all of the slide decks that we're going through, the lab guides, how to get your labs, all of that. So this is really going to be your single source of kind of truth, like we would say in the CMDB, for where you can have all of the content from today's session. The other thing to know, we'll kind of go into the labs, but we aren't doing any labs here within the workshop itself, but we'll kind of go through them and how you can get your lab instance, and you'll be able to take those home and work on that. The lab instances will be up until Sunday, so you can nerd out over the weekend if you choose. All right. So here is just our safe harbor notice, which simply means we might talk about, we being ServiceNow, what we expect or plan in the future. These are just based on our best guesses. Things can change. So it's really best to contact your account team for the most recent release information. But a lot of what we're talking about today is current state. Okay, next slide. All right, you can see we get to spend 3 hours today, 3 hours together today, and we have kind of a jam-packed agenda. So we're going to kick things off with my teammate Kieran for Data Foundations, which is really around our seminar and outcomes for the first section. Here's where we really talk about kind of big picture of ServiceNow and our data foundations and why having a healthy configuration management database and common service data model is so critical for understanding your operations landscape. And we'll talk through the success of data foundations and steps for a healthy CMDB. The audience on this one, just to know, a lot of like our IT, CXOs, business leaders, stakeholders, this session will really be kind of important for you here. And then from there, we're going to pass it over to Suhaib, and he's going to talk us through data ingestion, which is really all about how the CMDB works, which is personally one of my favorite parts. You'll learn the basics and capabilities around discovery and service graph connectors and agent client collector and a lot more. You'll learn service mapping and why understanding that business context is so important when dealing with outages. So this audience here, we're really going to talk about, we're going to be really mainly focused on the technical teams or platform architects or developers. And then from there to round things out, we're going to finish up with Can Darp, and he's going to teach us all about data governance. So here he'll walk through the elements of success for governance, data management, organizational engagement, and then setting up a CMDB steering committee. And he'll even show some of these capabilities within the platform. This audience is really more around kind of the same as the previous section. Again, those technical teams, platform architects, but we're adding in some governance leads. So again, really each of these guys are going to try to make this as interactive as possible. So please use the chat. We aren't doing any polls today, so we thought we could try it make this more humanistic in that chat and share our stories about why we love the CMDB, and then keep the Q&A to that Q&A panel. So with that, let's introduce our team. I'm going to first pass it over to Can Darp.
Nice to meet everyone. My name is Kandar Pandya, and I'm a core solution consultant here at ServiceNow, based in Toronto, Canada. I've been at ServiceNow for approaching 3 years, primarily working with customers in the tech and telco space. And so for me, the ITOM world is very important, as it's very important for my customers to better service their end customers. And so for me, ITOM, CMDB, it's all about using that underlying infrastructure data to better service customers in a more proactive approach. And so that's sort of the messaging I'm going to be passing on today, but really looking forward to the session. So, hey.
Yep. Hey guys, my name is Suhaib Hussain. I'm a solution consultant here at ServiceNow, just like Hendarp. So I've been at the company for about 2 years now, and I specialize in financial services companies. And I'm actually noticing now I'm wearing the same sweater as in that picture, funny enough. But yeah, what I love so much about CMDB is the fact that the customers I work with in the financial services industry, security and risk is paramount, right? That is one of the most important things in an organization like that, especially for the IT team. And the CMDB powers all of that, right? It powers what is going wrong, where the vulnerabilities lie, where the risks lie, ties it all back to the greater business context. So one of the best things I like talking about is the CMDB. So I'm very excited for this session. Kieran, I'll hand it off to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Suhaib. Hi, everyone. My name's Kieran Mahin. I'm a solutions consultant based in San Diego, covering the core part of the platform. I've been at ServiceNow for 2 years, but I've been in the ecosystem for all of my career. I used to use ServiceNow as a software engineer, as well as working in cloud, all kind of within FinServ. And, ITOM CMDB was very important for us, kind of like Suhaib mentioned. We're being able to proactively, resolve customer cases, make sure your service availability is very high, make sure your, change management processes are very accurate, where, as things change within the environment, you have a great system of record and auditability, which was really important for the work that I used to do. So, Emily, if there's nothing else, I'm going to go ahead and get started with my section.
Yep, all good.
All right. So, the first part of this, the first hour, we're going to be kind of going over the business side of the house. What is the vision for your CMDB? What are the outcomes that you're trying to drive with having a solidified CMDB and, building out that autonomous IT organization that is kind of the holy grail of IT? So what we're going to be covering is, how a single platform drives differentiated value across, different areas of your business, how healthy data really drives that outcomes, and then what are 6 concrete steps that you can take to deploy a healthy data foundation to support your CMDB as well as your service data model. So to start off, we're going to be kind of going over the big picture. What is ServiceNow? What is it made of? How does the platform really work? We're one platform, one data model, one AI control tower to bring value to every corner of your business. So ServiceNow brings in AI, data, and workflows into one place, one system of action that sits on top of all of your systems of record. We can connect with any system that has a REST or SOAP API. We offer a number of out-of-box integrations with those major systems, whether that's Snowflake, the Databricks, Workdays, anything that you guys need to bring into an actionable service. Our SKUs range from, the IT service to customer service, end-to-end CRM, as well as, back office operations like accounts payable. All of that comes in where AI is able to work across those different departments. Everything is related on that single data model. You're not stringing together all these disparate systems with different APIs. It all comes together where you can take action and update those other systems. So when we look at the actual platform layers, what does that consist of outside of, AI, data, and workflows? ServiceNow has very good infrastructure. We have our own cloud, our own data centers. Security is one of our top concerns. We work across different governments, the largest enterprises in the world. There's different options for, hosting, but for us, if you're going with the ServiceNow hosted option, we are, best in class from that perspective. From the platform itself, going from the bottom here, the first kind of foundation is that data layer. How are we bringing in those important records, building out relationships between all your business objects, the tasks, the users, and the groups in one place and having them all related? On top of your data, you build out all those essential workflows, make that automation occur for anything that needs to happen across the enterprise, being able to spawn off tasks to different teams, make people able to work together to fit your process in your industry as you need. From an AI perspective, ServiceNow has always been in AI, starting with machine learning back in, the early 2010s, being able to, use your data to make predictions about what might happen next within your environment, forecast, be able to pull out some similarities. As the LLMs came out, we incorporated generative AI into the platform. And now today, AI agents, you have the ability to build out your entire agentic workflow within the platform, which then has that strong data foundation, like we said, with the single data model, all those different automations that you have built out within the workflows. And finally, your engagement layer, the UX, being able to build out a number of different experiences for the people who are using your portals, your apps, anything that really drives engagement. So whether that's a workspace or a customer portal or an internal portal, all of these things work together and build off of one another to deliver that great experience. So when we're talking about data foundations, ServiceNow connects with, your zero copy connectors. We're able to connect with Snowflake, Databricks, any of those types of platforms where we want to have that, large amounts of data where we want to have context directly within the platform, not necessarily storing it in ServiceNow, but being able to have context for those large data sets as you're working through something like a ticket or a case or some sort of alert. Additionally, with Integration Hub, ServiceNow has a number of spokes, what we call spokes, which are our maintained APIs to be able to connect with all of those systems of record so you don't have to maintain them over time. We can work with Stream Connect, external content connectors if you want to be bringing in things like FAQs or knowledge bases from things like Confluence or SharePoint, things like that. Once you kind of connect your data within ServiceNow, this is kind of that first level of, okay, what are all of our different systems of record? We want to be able to, really understand it. ServiceNow allows you to build those relationships within the CMDB, as well as the Common Service Data Model, and now also the Knowledge Graph, which we're working on currently as of this year. So all that data from those systems of record in one place to give you that single pane of glass. And from there, all the different ways that you can take action, whether that's through the workflows that you can build out, the agentic, the AI agents, the specific workspaces that your analysts will be in, as well as being able to put analytics on any of that data that you have pulled into the platform. So when we think about that, having a single data model that has all of your workflows, it brings in all those systems of record where you're able to take those actions. Looking at this graph here at that first level, we're looking at, the workflows. How are people taking care of incident resolution? Where are they actually doing that work? When you have a system like that, this gives you visibility into the entire enterprise. So if everybody's, pulling in all their incidents and they're doing their workflows there, we get great visibility into what's actually going on within the environment. So this first dashboard I'm showing you here is one that we offer out of box. It tells us things like our CSAT score, our mean time to resolution, our percentage of automated tickets, unauthorized changes. And all of this becomes actually accurate information in real time because it is reflective of what people are doing on a day-to-day basis. After you've pulled in all that data, you've built that foundation, and this is where people are actually completing that work. We can bring that visibility all the way to the top of the CISO, any sort of executive office. So we had one more example in here as well, looking at something like the HR, if we're doing case resolution, onboarding, lifecycle events, and then pulling in those different workspaces that people may work in, we get the CHRO dashboard, which then shows us all that important data, like how long it takes to close an HR case, which cases are have breached SLAs, etc. So looking at the single data model, this is kind of a busy slide, but this kind of just shows all of the different tables and specifically the relationships that they have with each other. The way I think about ServiceNow is that it's a giant relational database with users, groups, um, configuration items, and assets, as well as the tasks. So you basically model everything that is a business object out in your organization, and then you have all the workflows that support it. Everything becomes relational within ServiceNow. When we release a new application or anything that comes from ServiceNow, all of it is operating on that single data model. We have relationships between things like an incident or a case. So if you think about, a customer case comes into your organization, how are we going to be passing that to IT? Well, it's not going to be a separate system. It's not going to be an API call. It's going to be directly linked from your customer support right to those back office operations so that you can support people directly and have a faster time to resolution, and have the context for your people to understand what to do. So this is, a number of tables that we have here. You can see some of the relationships. I'd recommend maybe looking at this when we send this deck out after. So when we're talking about, let's take a step back too and look at how, IT itself has evolved. Because when you see the big picture, it's very clear how far, at least ServiceNow has come and why the CMDB and AI specifically are converging now. We started with the human-initiated IT. Technicians handled issues as they arose manually, often in silos. You'd have all those different systems. There was skill involved, but there was no shared system, no shared knowledge. Knowledge lived in people's heads, but it was not structured data. Then the shift came to workflow-based IT. Platforms like ServiceNow, we started codifying expertise into repeatable processes, workflows, change management, incident management. Everything became a little more predictable and it became more traceable because we had all that automation built in and everything became related. The next step became the knowledge-based IT, where now we're not just automating the workflow, we're capturing insight. Who owns what is connected, what is at risk. And that's where the CMDB and the service graph and the common service data model really start to shine. They turn that scattered detail, all those different tasks, everything into a single structured foundation for operations. And now we've entered the era of the autonomous IT where agents are able to take that trusted data, that good structure, and take informed action. They're not necessarily replacing people, they're augmenting them. They're resolving incidents, flagging risks, coordinating responses. And then the CMDB, as it's relating all of the workflows, the business objects, the users and the groups, it becomes this kind of launch pad, this foundation for intelligent automation. And that's why this layer of the chart matters. Being able to have your business value grow as you build that strong data foundation from, the first kind of manual process of setting something up to building in that data foundation and then turning on to things like AI. So, we're gonna now talk a little bit about what the building blocks of what that really is, and how the CMDB, the Common Service Data Model, and the Knowledge Graph all lay the foundation for success in terms of the data that you're storing within ServiceNow. So the CMDB, it solves a number of problems, and it's really not just about, the inventory of what's out there. It's really about the impact that that inventory has on the business and where it's connected to your processes. So let's quickly walk through, where the CMDB, excuse me. some of these business problems that the CMDB solves. So within AI ops, when IT events are tied to business services in the CMDB, you can use AI and automation to focus attention where it matters to you. You can reduce noise from your environment. We can pull in all those different, alerts that are being sent into any particular asset that you are managing. The asset management. If people are using the workflows to be able to request or retire or get fixes on the asset, the CMDB is tracking that entire workflow as well as where that asset is in its particular life cycle. Looking at change management, how are we relating the changes to anything that is deployed in our environment and when it is deployed and whether it's in dev and prod, being able to have that traceability if we change things and something goes down and understand exactly what happened. From an enterprise architecture perspective, we want to be able to streamline that technology in portfolio planning. So, before when we're doing that planning phases, when we're setting everything up into the deploy phase and then into the service and maintaining phase, you want to be able to create that CI, that kind of first business object from an idea all the way to the point of deployment and monitor and retire. Customer service, what are our customers using? How do we actually provide a particular business service or application to them? Being able to have, our certificate management. I could go through these, but I just want to kind of give an idea of what, some of these business problems that a CMDB can solve specifically within IT. So we want to kind of throw this up. What is a digital twin? I've been kind of alluding to this the entire time. A digital twin is a representation designed to accurately reflect a physical system, and that's exactly what a CMDB is supposed to do. The CMDB is the digital twin of your technology environment, and so we're mapping all those business objects, those assets, those services that you support. The difference is that talking about the common service data model, which supports the CMDB, this is how the technology is managed and provides value to the business. So CMDB, the objects, and CSDM is a little more focused on the process and how we actually maintain the data behind all of that. So kind of to start off a little bit of what the common service data model is and how it supports the CMDB. If we're looking at the portfolio of services, applications, and infrastructure that you are supporting, it goes through a common life cycle. So starting at the ideation phase, how are we getting intake for different ideas for the business? How are we aligning with leadership on goals that we want to hit? That's always kind of the first phase. And how do we actually vet that out of, do we have resources? Does this make sense? Does this have a business benefit? That's always the first stage of, deciding if this is a service or a application that is worth putting effort into. The second phase goes into design and planning. How do we set up our teams? What, resources are we actually going to use? What financial resources will we use? All of that type of actual, setting up after we've vetted out it's a good idea. Doing the build and integration, being able to have a good, CI/CD process, automate deployments, being able to track the object, the service, anything that you're developing throughout its life cycle into the actual service delivery. So when it goes live, how do we support it? How do we continually improve it? If there is an incident, how do we take that back and put it back into the build? And this becomes kind of its own little circle right here, as you'll see indicated by this arrow right there. And then once it gets into the service consumption, being able to make it available for customers, your internal employees, being able to publish it to those different product catalogs and offerings. So this is kind of when you think about a CI, you think about ServiceNow, things that you're tracking throughout its life cycle. This is, this is the methodology by which you do it. And so here again is just a little bit, I guess, better slide, a little bit better visualization of what this looks like. We take some sort of idea, turn it into a planning item. We decide this is now going to be a business capability that we manage. It turns into a business application. We get into our software design lifecycle. We make it into components. We link it with our DevOps change model. We can track all of that kind of lifecycle within there. Once we get it into the actual service delivery, we have that kind of virtuous life cycle of, okay, there's an incident, let's fix it, change management right here, and then being able to actually consume it for our end customers. And down at the bottom here, we have, a number of the different people that are involved within this process. That chief strategist is really going to be important at that first step to make sure we're aligning with the outcomes that your organization wants. Who is the process owner, who is going to be, uh, building that out, designing that service, the product owner, the contract manager, and then all the data stewards at the end of this. This is, the different teams that are supporting it, your DevOps teams, the ITSM teams, the CSM teams, making sure that they're continually updating information accurately to reflect what is happening with that service when you're starting from ideation all the way down to putting it within your product catalogs and services. So, one of the things we wanted to discuss too was, how context in the CMDB really drives that. So, at the first level, the CMDB really is that layer of, what are the nodes within your business? What are the, relationships? From there, we build that out into the service graphs. So, you may be tracking all that kind of underlying infrastructure within the CMDB, all the servers, everything like that. But what does that actually mean in terms of a business capability or a service offering? We want to be able to map that into one place. So if somebody says, "Hey, my, order status application or my e-commerce site is not working," we have that mapped to all the underlying infrastructure and it has meaning for the actual business. At the final level, we look at the knowledge graph, which is the, where ServiceNow is going, where, we've taken the CMDB with all the nodes and we relate all the changes, the incidents, the cases, and then we tie that in with your service. Knowledge graph takes that another step further where we can, tie in extra information, whether that's knowledge bases, anything else that you would need to have to be able to service that or improve the service that you have. So knowledge graph kind of goes to the next level. And so, like we were just saying, the knowledge graph really becomes the place where you unify all of the data within your organization. You have all of that extra context, within the service graph. We bring in all the discovery information, anything about your organization from a people perspective, organizations, requests. And Michael, I don't, is there anything else you'd like to say about this slide before I move on to?
Question, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, what I was actually just typing something out. One of the nice things about Knowledge Graph, we've provided some capabilities out of the box to connect disparate data that may not be naturally connected or may be connected through way too many hops. So similar to previous table joins, now you're going to be able to connect more and more data and directly tie it to workflows and outcomes. And utilizing AI, obviously, that's a big part of being able to take all of the platform-wide data, including like zero copy data, and tie it together to directly be useful in workflows and outcomes. So looking forward to a lot more cool stuff coming along the knowledge graph front.
Yeah. So it's expansion of, what we currently have within CMDB. It's exciting stuff. So now we're going to talk about, success with, how do we actually set this up? How do we have this, map of the business that includes your workflows, your people, your processes, all the assets, all the configuration items out there? What does that actually mean? But to start off, and I'd like to ask this to the audience, why does this fail? And for anyone who's used ServiceNow or has been involved in the CMDB project, I'd like to ask if any of these sort of things sound familiar to you in your implementations or working on a product like this. So, there's a lack of formality in implementation and governance, unreliable data sources and lack of automation. It wasn't driven by goals of the organization. Things were customized without understanding what is support out of the box. There's not enough data, critical few things versus a lot of trivial nonsense, inaccurate data. People are not pulling in the right stuff and reconciling it, or it's not tied in with any sort of process, and you just kind of have static information. I'd love to hear from the chat if anybody. All of the above. Wow. Okay. Yeah, these are the things that we want to fix. Okay, literally everything. Lack of governance in CI ownerships. Yeah, yeah. And these in exactly this. So these are the things that you want to be careful of, and I'll be able to share some stories from my previous life. Lack of service ownership, garbage in, garbage out, inaccurate data. Yep. Yeah, it's very, having a CMDB, I know it's a database, but it is not just a system of record. This really needs to tie in with processes. It's mapping your business and it needs to have outcomes that you're driving towards. This is the whole point of it. So yeah, garbage in, nothing out. So yeah, it's great to hear these things, and hopefully, as we go through this a little bit more, and Kondarp goes through his section, there's certain things you can do, and a lot of it really is on the people side. It seems like, reading this chat and seeing what you guys are saying is it comes down to having those people who understand the purpose of it. So, um, you know, going into a little bit about what it really takes to succeed with the CMDB. First, oh, excuse me. Starting with that CMDB, you obviously do need that technical expertise to, configure the platform, make sure we're setting up the processes and the people to set up for your organization. Every organization, every industry is different. Having someone who can understand the platform deeply and configure it to your needs, not customize, configure to your needs is very important. From there, being able to ingest and automate the population of CI data, because as soon as it's, stale, it's not really useful anymore. We want to make sure that how we're pulling in any information about those business objects, that infrastructure, that process must be automated, because then it becomes useless very quickly if it's just out of date and it's connected to workflows. Finally, not finally, I should say. Next one is leadership vision, making sure you have those centralized standards and outcomes tied to enterprise value. So why are we creating this service? Why are we, using this infrastructure? Why are we doing all this? What are the outcomes we're really driving towards? And then tying those CIs in with it. And finally, the governance, making sure people and the processes behind all of this are really working together and understand why they are doing it. Because you can have executive leadership, but if that doesn't trickle down to the teams that are putting in the data, the customer service management, the IT service management, the change management teams, if they don't understand, they're not going to be doing their best job of updating it and understanding how this digital map, this digital twin is really aligned to your business outcomes that you're trying to get. So now we're at the fun part, how do we actually do this? What are the 6 steps that you can take to, deploy, have a successful data foundation? First one is align, get your leadership, understand the current state of your business, making sure, we know what everybody wants, setting up the scope of our goals, establishing governance, building out those teams, modeling our data, ingesting and operationalizing that data. And finally, scaling this out for repeatable processes. And then that repeats. So to start off with align, you want to align with leadership, current baseline, stakeholders, and KPIs. The way to do this, these are kind of the different activities that you can take. So from a business side on the right here, strategic initiatives and business side, initiatives, these are the types of initiatives that you want to kind of set out that your CMDB is meant to accomplish. Things like, adopt agentic AI, lower the cost to serve, lower the risk and exposure of, deployed services, being able to take, some sort of business need and have that as, your statement. From there, we put that into, the center here in the executive alignment. And when we are building out that kind of data foundation, we're going to be thinking about that. What is the workflows we want to be, building to hit this mean time to resolution? What are the most important CIs that we're tracking that actually do that? Like, what is that important infrastructure, or is it, kind of tiered? However we do that, you want to be able to take those business initiatives and then understand your data and bring that into alignment so that, you can start to drive these things. And so when we're aligning and we're looking at the current landscape, this means, taking a look at the current technology portfolio, the service portfolio, the technology org structure, how are our teams distributed, how do they support, are we offshore or onshore, what are the relationships between the people? It's not always just the technology. It really does come down to the processes and the people and the organization behind them. What does that currently look like in your business? What do we currently offer? And then, taking a, look at what other technologies that you have to deliver service within the organization. So here are some questions that, we pulled up, things you can ask yourselves, from an organizational objective, what are strategic IT and business initiatives that support Data Foundations efforts? Who are the key sponsors for this effort that can share the narrative and get buy-in? So if we're going to be reducing something like mean time to resolution or reduce outages, who does that affect? Who do we need to get to sponsor that? Is that IT? Is that the networking team? Is that the software engineering teams? Who is that really? What is the current, landscape? What do we already have in ServiceNow? What does our current technology footprint look like? What are we integrated with? How are we pulling in all that data? Setting out KPIs and baselines with regards to pulling in CIs, healthy data, and then, again, stakeholders. Who do we need to be involving versus who's kind of sponsoring the project? So where to get started with organizational engagement? We always say crawl, walk, run at ServiceNow, especially when adopting the platform. The same goes for, working with your organization. So within crawl, starting with that stakeholder engagement, identify who is working on business objectives that would benefit from a CMDB, who would benefit from this, process mapped to business objects. Walk, we're going to be, doing high value, low effort steps to address current business needs. Gather those use cases and identify the areas that you can improve in as soon as possible. Maybe it's cleaning up your data, maybe it's, building out those workflows to support, whatever that object was. And then run, once you kind of build out that long-term roadmap, we've identified our stakeholders, we've cleaned up some things. It becomes kind of a virtuous cycle in which, we're improving the CMDB as a whole and we've improved the processes behind it. Scope and goals. So creating goals based on current alignment and specific value to, track value and not boil the entire ocean. So when we say this, it really comes down to being able to, make this departmental, make this, org based. What is it you want to accomplish? Sometimes we need to break those goals out. If you have a larger overarching goal, we want to break that out into smaller ones that are achievable. So then you kind of are able to do it in an agile fashion to be able to hit that goal. Understanding how, like, what is your approach? What are your constraints and assumptions to be able to do that? And then why? Are we aligning those business outcomes with what the CMDB actually supports? So we put in a few different examples within here. Aligning IT with the business is a strategic initiative. An example use case of that would be something like an IT component breaks. How do we know if this affects one of our mission critical business services? Maybe it's a customer portal or somewhere where they are able to purchase a service or a product. How do we tie it back to the CMDB? We map all the infrastructure components to support each of those business services. We tie that in with change management processes. We tie that in with the support desk, the customer service desk. And so people can actually, do their work quickly rather than just having a ticket come in and have no idea what actually supports that service. Expanding something like a customer base. We want to add, new interactive services as a use case to make the customer website better. How do we make sure it'll continue to scale? We're going to be tracking that infrastructure and applications to provide input for performance, optimization, and enterprise architecture evolution. Again, all kind of tracked throughout that common data service lifecycle, and tying that back into the CMDB. And so this is,
Can I throw something in real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think one of the key important things when we're talking about strategic initiatives is, do you have your 30-second elevator pitch and understand what leaders in an organization are being measured on and what matters to them? And if the CMDB can't be tied back to them in some way, shape, or form, then you immediately struggle with leadership alignment and with strategically identifying, why you're doing what you're doing. And a lot of CMDB teams get in reactive mode where they're just responding to requests and they're consistently trying to plug holes in what feels like, a dam that's crashing down around you. But in reality, the CMDB can drive tons of value in an organization. You just need to be able to speak at the right level or have champions in your org that can. So being able to tie them to those strategic goals is so important, so that you know how what you're doing ties directly to the mission of your organization. All right, I'm good.
Awesome. Thank you. No, I love when you jump in. Um, so, and yeah, so kind of continuing on that, being able to use those value slices to being able to look at, the scope of top 50 business apps with application services. There's a number of there's an approach to that, and then understanding what value you're going to drive. So within that, if we're looking at the scope of the top 50 business apps, we do, the horizontal capability of aligning it with the CSDM, defining the application services and offerings, resolving our application owners, tagging essential, knowledge bases to it so people can service it well or work on deploying it or, be able to self-serve if they are doing it. And, being able to have that reuse infer ask data kind of life cycle there. The value something like that drives is service-aware routing, reporting, clear ownership, better change in mean time to resolution. Mike, I don't know if there's anything you'd want to say else about, just value slicing, going from the strategic initiative, and then how you can kind of break that down.
Yeah, I mean the simple point of it is, don't boil the ocean. Obviously, scope something. A lot of people try to do like the entire fly approach across, 10 major services, and what you're looking at is you're looking at 6 to 12 months of work with very little value coming out the back end. And if you haven't planned how you're going to measure value in the first place, you haven't captured the baseline of where you're actually at. It's really impossible, and it turns into just a headache for everybody. So when it comes down to it, you take slices that are specific to things you're trying to accomplish in the organization, and you tie them directly to value because it's there. The problem is we don't articulate it necessarily super well, or we don't start measuring from the beginning on the outcomes that it can have. Measuring CMDB is ridiculously hard because if you're just looking for accuracy, you're not seeing how it's providing value to the organization. Taking value slices really allows you to align the work that you're doing with the expected outcomes, measure those outcomes, and if they don't hit the mark, make changes accordingly, and be agile in how you're approaching your CMDB management to actually meet those business objectives.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Michael. So the next section is governance. I wanted to share kind of a personal story that I had experienced in my previous jobs here. So when I was a software engineer, I was kind of working within FinServ. Um, One of the things that happened with our team was that we were not aligned with the executive leadership. We didn't really, no one on the software engineering, the product owner, the scrum master, nobody understood why ServiceNow was important and how our change process, and we were using change tickets in ServiceNow, how important that was to our business. So the data wasn't great within the change tickets. People didn't really care, but really what that was doing for the organization I was at was being able to resolve those tickets for customers really quickly. We didn't know that we were contributing to the CMDB. We didn't know that Fidelity, excuse me, our organization was, my team was supporting customer cases to be able to resolve any sort of application outage, anything like that. So, um, you know, being able to have that centralized responsibility for what the initiatives are and why we need a CMDB, and then being able to have the distributed teams that are working on all those different applications and services and making sure they are aligned is extremely important because people need to be putting in good data throughout the entire process. And I think it's, from my own experience, we didn't understand that we were contributing to that, map of the organization to provide great customer service. Um, establishing governance, one of the things you can do is establish a steering committee, setting up a CMDB with IT leaders who have that strategic decision-making ability, and being able to articulate to the different leaders, the different teams, what the CMDB is doing, how that team affects it, and being able to have those meetings, once a month, because not everyone's going to come into your organization and know exactly what ServiceNow does and how the CMDB affects all that. So, establishing a steer code is very important. You want to be able to get early buy-in from executives to create that credibility and trust, and then be able to, send them out to the different teams so that information is distributed throughout the entire organization. And so, forming a steering committee, these are kind of the different considerations you want to have, different planning areas, desired outcomes, who's involved, what is your charter? What are the logistics? How often are you communicating and reporting? And then here are each of the considerations that you'd want to have for those planning areas and responsible parties. This will be in the deck. I don't want to just read off the slides for you guys, but these are, the different areas of the steer co.
I'll chime in one thing on this too. The fact is, not every organization has enough formality to define a formal steering committee. But when the CMDB team, the CMDB is owned by the platform team, and there is no co-enterprise ownership, there is also no co-enterprise buy-in when it comes to being able to determine how they're using the CMDB and what they're going to get out of it. So being able to open that up to the larger business organization, to your IT leaders, to key stakeholders and champions in different orgs that have resources and have budget, it makes all the difference in the world in success, because the CMDB is expected to cover your entire technology stack and what you're doing with your technology to drive business outcomes. You can't do that in a silo, and you can't do that in a box. This just gives you a structure to be able to do that. A steering committee can drive co-ownership and co-responsibility for both success and failures, which gives the CMDB makes it an enterprise tool that can be used to drive outcomes.
Yeah. Michael, I might just have you co-run this with me the rest of it. You're giving some great points in there. Um, so yeah, just to kind of tee off what he just said, these are some of the things that you can do. What is the governance and data plan? How are you guys documenting things, and what are you measuring? So when we're thinking about who would be important to add to the steering committee, who has that influence, who has those relationships within your organization, who's going to be responsible to be kind of driving this steering committee for your CMDB to meet those outcomes.
And I'll just
Documentation.
say one last thing. Sorry.
Keep going, man. I love it.
All right. So Joshua brought something up in the chat around getting buy-in for headcount and the view of boiling the ocean. Really, what this all comes down to is building trust and momentum. So you have a CMDB team and a platform team. That team has to perform according to business expectations, right? If you build trust, you get those value slices. You show that you're doing something that matters, and that what you're doing is actually serving your larger organization. You gain trust and credibility, and leaders are more likely to pour resources into areas that they trust will help them achieve their goals and objectives. You tie that to a long-term roadmap with vision. Now you have both trust building on one side, and you have a roadmap and a perspective of where you're going on another side. You bring both of those pieces together, you have a comprehensive plan and something that people are willing to invest in. A lot of ServiceNow teams can see the potential of ServiceNow in their organization when the rest of the organization can't. The job and the goal there is to be able to effectively document, showcase, and market that in a way that helps build credibility and turn ServiceNow from the platform team who's struggling to meet all these demands into a strategic enterprise tool that can really do what ServiceNow presents itself to do. And I've seen it happen. I've seen it work at ridiculously large corporations. I didn't mention earlier, but I'm in our Tech West 1 strategic region. So I work with the largest tech companies in the world on utilizing ServiceNow in similar ways. It's everything that you think can be done. There's a lot of challenges and a lot of problems. It's a tool, it's software. But the fact is the capabilities exist and are there. You just need the alignment to be able to make it happen. People and process. All right.
Great.
Passing the ball.
Yeah, we're back. So now getting into how we, start to model this data. Step 4, what is going to be captured? What are we going to relate? And how is that data going to be governed? So, again, with everything in ServiceNow, crawl, walk, run. Don't try to do every single class that you're going to be tracking within the CMDB. What are those most important classes? So start simply, identify what those most important classes are for your organization. What types of servers, what types of, endpoints that would then be kind of the parent class for anything that branches off from it. So yeah, for example, if you need to include storage in your CMDB, you might start off with CIs for physical storage. The next step might be file systems and then logical unit numbers as an example. And on this next slide as well, we just have some samples of what those principal CI classes are or can be. It's your Windows servers, what is looking at what service that Windows server supports. It's the Windows Server administration. The use cases are, operations, maintenance, etc. So, figuring out what those most important things are so you're not tracking everything. I mean, you guys are at big organizations that have a lot of different infrastructure. Start with the most important ones, and grow from there. And so, to bring it back into the CSDM, when you're thinking about that data, when we are building out the, life cycle of these things, it's going to kind of align with the same, you know, process that the CSDM offers. How do we plan out what we're putting out into the environment? How do we design, put it tied to a business application, build it, deploy it, have service delivery, and make it an offering as a business service product or anything like that. Michael, was there anything you'd want to add on just CSDM and principal classes specifically, or should we move on to the next kind of section?
I mean, we could go on forever, but we only have 3 hours. I've got
Yeah,
like
yeah. All
five
right. Well,
hours just on this topic.
We also
yeah,
only have a
I know
couple
we
more
could.
minutes in this section. So,
Only five
yeah.
more minutes. Okay, I
Yep.
will speed through this then. Thanks,
Okay.
Emily.
Yeah, for
So the fifth step, ingest and operationalize. The word's been difficult for me today. Being able to automate all of the data that you're going to be pulling into the environment, pulling in those systems of record, maybe using ServiceNow, discovery. Having agents set up those processes and governance teams, and establishing those KPIs that people can refer to make sure your data is good, and then establish what insight looks like, being able to use those reporting and metrics and leverage it for your planning as you're going through to set up that solid data foundation. So looking at the process, the lifecycle management, everything that's out there within your environment on the left here, pulling that in through, service graph connectors, ServiceNow's mid server, importing different catalogs, bring all that data into CMDB. We make it service aware. We're able to rationalize all that with the tools that the CMDB offers, pull that into the different workspaces and visualizations that you have, and then monitor it and audit it so we understand how it's doing, and then finally deliver the value that we have behind all of that infrastructure and CI information. And finally, scale. Take lessons learned from everything that you've done. It's really important to have that two-way communication with the CIO, anybody who is working at that technical level, and the CMDB owners, the sys admins, making sure that those outcomes that your leadership is driving towards is aligned with the people who are actually administrating your platform. So then you can scale and meet those objectives as you go along, and your CMDB changes. Um, and that leads me into my next point. The CMDB, CSDM, it's not you do this once. You need to think of the CMDB as a process that is continually that is alive. It's always being updated. It reflects the changing needs of your business, the processes, all of that. So, we're always going to be continually updating this, and that is, the whole purpose of this. It is an evolution. So, what are some of the outcomes that we can drive with this across the platform, at least? For ITSM, being able to have strong change management processes tied to all those business services and underlying infrastructure. That's where you get the reduction in tickets, mean time to resolution. ITOM kind of tied in with the CMDB, with ITSM, excuse me, having all of that mapped out from a visibility perspective, looking at system health, being able to pull in all those logs if you integrate with those other tools that push them to it. Asset management, having all of your assets tied in, whether it's software licenses or hardware, having that tied into the asset life cycle from, we're going to purchase this all the way to that we are going to retire it. SPM, being able to map the resources and kind of looking at how we put a service into production from the ideation phase to the service catalog and everything that comes in between. It's very important that we map whatever it is that we are planning to that CMDB. SecOps, what are those critical items? Where do we have security risks? DevOps, of course, this is where the deployment and the actual build phase of using a CMDB works. customer service management and being able to map anything a customer may be using to what you manage and having those teams have that context to resolve things for them quickly. Um, and so, yeah, the CMDB, it goes across all of these different business problems. I already, came across this slide earlier. And Michael, I think you're going to be able to explain this last section with just how CMDB ties in with the digital portfolio management, if you don't mind taking over for a minute here.
No, not at all. So I want you guys to memorize this table structure because there's going to be a quiz at the end of it. The
Easy.
fact is, the back end of the CSDM is complex, and this is not all of it at all. But really, what it looks like is ServiceNow has designed a platform that comprehensively manages the lifecycle of all the technology and service delivery systems in your organization. Starts with SPM, APM, enterprise architecture, technology portfolio management. We got that DPR DevOps change portion where build and integration, we can capture things like artifacts with actual code bases that can be rolled back, ITOM to be able to capture alerting and visibility, ITSM to manage how services both delivered and consumed, and data foundations across the whole bottom. So we have a lot of products that help build the data foundations. If you capture information the way that you work, you'll naturally have that information available as it moves through the life cycle. And that's one of the things that people miss a lot. They're trying in the service delivery side to recapture all the information that's been designed, defined, developed, and deployed after the fact in ways that make sense. ServiceNow comprehensively uses the CSDM to be able to capture information each step of the way and be able to reinforce that in a solid feedback loop where the things that you're building tie directly to the things that you're delivering, which tie directly to the things that are the way they're being consumed, and measure it across the board. So looking at this from this high level perspective, data foundation, CMDB, the CSDM is what connects all these pieces together. So Joshua, I agree with you on that. I'll talk about that in the chat in a minute. So when it comes to things like digital portfolio management, it's these connected pieces that allow us to do things like roll-up metrics. We were looking at the CIO and the CHRO dashboards earlier, but it's great to be able to see a comprehensive view of your entire enterprise. When you want to look at how you're actually doing across your portfolio and have folks that are like VPs be able to actually see across their stack what's happening, rather than relying on reports from all these different tools, you see this plan, build, run info phase right here on this service IT support desk. There's a chain at the top in the portfolios. There's an enterprise technology portfolio with service management, IT support, and IT support desk. Digital portfolio management as part of ITSM allows you to roll up the metrics, from the manager to the director layer to the VP layer so that folks can actually see how well all the different services they're using are performing underneath the stack and how that affects the overall, perspective of what's going on within each given portfolio. So there's a lot of capabilities in ServiceNow to bring all these pieces together. When you actually are able to show this internally, it changes the game. It changes the way leadership sees ServiceNow as a platform, and allows you to really take advantage of getting those additional resources, that buy-in, those steering committees and stakeholder groups to actually commit to utilizing ServiceNow in the way it was built, and to understand why siloed tools just can't give you the same perspective. You can spend a lot of money and time trying to cobble this stuff together, and a lot of organizations do. Or you can integrate the things you have, run things the way that you run them already, pull that data into ServiceNow and get a comprehensive view from top to bottom, be it how well are your projects doing, your stories and your epics doing, how does that tie to what you're actually deploying, how well is what you're deploying actually delivering service, and where's the problems there, and how overall is this affecting your internal and external customers. Those connections from a CMDB and CSDM perspective, you see the service offering configuration item. I remember when they changed that in incident as a customer, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so not ready for this. Even though we were on CSDM 3.0, but we were still just focused on the configuration item stage. But the fact is, we try to make it accessible across the platform where all of these components are linked together, and having them be linked together in a way that the platform expects. We're building more and more workflows that rely on that connectivity and that data to drive these outcomes, to automate, to improve, and to really tie, XYZ goes bump in the night on a technical side, what's the comprehensive downstream impact? Who needs to be notified? What needs to happen? And take a lot of that work off the hands of people scrambling, trying to get that information, put it into the hands of AI or into the hands of the workflows itself, and allow people to focus on, what they do best, not scrambling to put out fires, but instead trying to drive the organization's outcomes.
And with that, that's all we got for this portion of the workshop. Thank you all for listening to me. I don't know if there's a question we might want to ask to the chat to follow us up, but thank you. And thank you, Mike, for jumping in there.
My section is all about data ingestion, right? How does data get into the CMDB? How do we manage it? What kind of data do we want to pull in? So throughout this base section, I'm going to be hitting on CMDB basics. So just the first couple of slides, just a level set on some of the basic terminology around the CMDB. From there, getting into what is discovery, what are the different ways to populate the CMDB. And then from there, getting into discovery, getting into service mapping, and then we'll end off with reconciliation, right? So how do we federate the CMDB and make sure that we have the right information coming in? So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So again, this is all part of that ingest section, right? So getting the data into the CMDB from X, Y, and Z source. And we'll be talking about those different data ingestion methods, service mapping, and then you'll get hands-on experience through the labs after the session. So starting off with basics, what is a configuration item? So we're starting all the way at the beginning, right? What is a CI? What exactly are you doing? So a configuration item is any component that needs to be managed in order to deliver or support a service, right? At the fundamental level, that is what a CI is. It's any kind of hardware, software, services, applications that you guys have in your environment that you need to manage from an IT perspective to then support some kind of business service. So just to give you an example, right? Let's say I have a website, right? That's a web server that's running with a database behind it. Let's say it's running on a computer and there's a load balancer in front of it. That's already a huge amount of CIs right there, right? That web server is a CI, that database is a CI, that load balancer in front of it is a CI. That computer that it's running on, right? Whether that's an EC2 or it's on-prem, that is also a CI. And each one of these things has different attributes within it, right? CPU, utilization, software is installed, et cetera. It's all going to change depending on which CI you're looking at, right? So being able to distinguish between these, and then as incidents come up, as we go to change something, being able to track it down to that CI level is paramount for root cause analysis and impact analysis. But with that example I just gave, right, we have a couple different things, but then a computer underneath it. You might say, hey, aren't those all assets, right? What is the difference between an asset and a configuration item? So that's a pretty common question we get all the time, right? A lot of CIs are assets, a lot of assets are CIs, but these are two different things in the ServiceNow world, right? And that's something we do need to differentiate because of the fact that assets from a ServiceNow perspective are seen as from a financial perspective, right? So that example I just gave, we had that computer that was running that web server. That computer has a cost associated to it, right? That computer has a refresh date that we need to uphold. That is what we look at from an asset perspective. But then from a CI perspective, we're looking at those attributes. What is the CPU utilization? Why is CPU utilization jacking up? What is causing this incident or this outage, right? So being able to differentiate these is really, really important in terms of populating the CMDB. And then from there, right, we have rules set up in ServiceNow. So when you get certain types of CIs imported through discovery, through service graph connectors, through ACC, that can automatically create an asset. And then we can set rules vice versa that, hey, we retire the CI, it retires the asset as well. So making sure you have that distinction is really important in how you plan what you want to do with the CMDB and how you import that data. And this also ties directly to our outcomes, right? What Kieran was talking about of what do we actually want to do with the CMDB? Do we want to have better asset management and find our computers and make sure we know where everything is? Or for our end user computers? Fantastic. Let's track the assets themselves. Or, hey, we want to reduce the MTTR on a specific business service. Okay, let's tie that to the CIs, right? So very important to distinguish those two. What should go into the CMDB? I know we saw a lot of those questions in Kieran's section of what should we actually be looking at from a CMDB perspective? What should actually go into there, right? We might have a lot of information in there, or maybe we have nothing in there at all and we're in that planning phase. This all ties back to outcomes, right? What are we hoping to achieve with the CMDB? So if we are, let's just say, for example, our goal with the CMDB is we want to increase customer satisfaction. Sorry, not reduce. We want to increase customer satisfaction. So with that, our way of doing that is putting the CMDB and tracking ITSM and event management, all that great stuff against all of our customer-facing applications, right? So think the company website, right? Or the e-commerce platform or the checkout service. We want to track all that information in the CMDB. Well, fantastic. Anything related to that, right? That's the kind of information we want to start by bringing into the CMDB, and everything that's not related to that from an impact perspective or a root cause perspective, right? For when things go down, we don't need to import that information, right? That is unnecessary to our goal. Let's say our goal is something else, like we want to track the end user computing devices, and we want to make sure we know where every single laptop is. We want an easy way of ingesting that information into the CMDB to then track from an IT services perspective. Well, fantastic. Let's look specifically at that computer class. I'll talk about classes later, but let's talk about that computer category and import specifically that data and take it almost at the class level, right? And start class by class and kind of not necessarily boil the ocean, right? And start very, very small in terms of what exactly do we want to do. Create that circle of like, okay, this is our scope. This is what we want to do with the CMDB, and import that data only. And so you can see kind of some of these bullet points hit on that, right? Exclude types that are not needed for impact analysis. CIs usually, you want to look at the ones that are going to cause incidents or we're going to create changes against. From there, we need to think about this from an operational perspective as well, right? Kieran hit on a lot of this in his first section, but when we're talking about CI classes or different CI groups, right, or applications, we want to make sure that somebody's managing these kind of things, right? We have someone aligned to managing that type of device. And then there is a lifecycle process identified of, okay, this is where we start this application, right? This is how we maintain it. This is the operational rules around it. And then as we go to retire it, these are all the rules we have set in place that when this is retired, the asset record is also retired, just as an example, right? So making sure you have that governance in place beforehand is paramount to making sure that we have a clean CMDB and it is functioning as we want it to. And the last part I'll mention as well is, where do the CIs originate, right? One thing I'm going to hit on towards the end is this idea of multi-source CMDB, right? We don't necessarily need all of our data coming from one place. The idea is that ServiceNow is that single source of truth with all those other system sprawls tying into ServiceNow into the CMDB. So what's really important with that is knowing exactly where are these devices coming from, right? Is it coming from SCCM? Is it coming from ServiceNow Discovery? Is it coming from both, right? And having an understanding of that and basically planning that out before you start these ingestion methods is extremely important to making sure that we do have a clean CMDB. So I mentioned CMDB CI classes, and that's extremely important in all of this, right? So the way that the CMDB basically works is at the highest level, right? Just like any database, you have this relationship concept. At the highest level, we have the CMDB CI table, right? This has all the different CIs in there for any kind of class. From there, we have three major categories: hardware, application, and services. So going back to that example I was saying all the way at the beginning, right? Of we have this web server that's powering this website that's running on this computer, right? That computer will be funneled into this hardware class that contains all the different hardware, the network switches, the routers, etc. Then that application, right? That's equally as important as the hardware, right? The actual application that we're running, that WordPress, for example, right? That's all stored in that application table. And then from there, the service that we're supporting, right? What is the business context of all of this? Fantastic. That's the customer website, just as an example. And then from there, we derive classes from here, right? So we have child relationship tables that then go into like network switch or Windows Server, etc. And these are all hierarchical. So once we have the CMDB set up, right? So we have an idea of like, okay, these are the classes that we want to start with. These are the data sources that we want to use. Now let's get into attributes, right? So great, we have the CIs in there, but the whole point of this is these are devices that we're going to be configuring, right? We need to track specific components of that device to then get the information we need for things like root cause analysis. And so within each of these CI records, we can track different attributes, right? And then there's a hierarchy to these attributes where we have root level. So these are what you can almost deem as like the mandatory, right? These are the attributes that we absolutely have to have for this specific CI class. So for something like a laptop, right? Let's say we have to have the storage, just as an example, right? You can put that as a class level. But then something for root level, you could put like the MAC address, right? And then at the CI level, you can put like the CI name, right? So you can put these different types of attributes within there and say like, hey, these are the attributes that we need to have. These are the ones that we're tracking. And then that information is then surfaced as we go to respond to incidents, as we go to create change requests, etc. And so all of this is going to be tracked in the CI class manager. So I'll show that off very briefly. But basically, we can track this entire hierarchical relationship within the CI class manager. So if we go into hierarchy, we type in something like Windows Server, we can see that hierarchy of that CI table I was talking about earlier, going down to the hardware, going down to computer, going down to server, and then eventually Windows Server, which is where those CIs live. Within here, right, we can assign that managed group. We can put a description. We can decide if it's a principal class. I know Kieran talked about that earlier as well. And then we can decide those attributes that I was talking about. So we can look at the derived ones, right? These are coming in from these parent tables, server, computer, hardware, or CI. And then we can see the ones that are added on as a requirement for this specific class. And you can see that this one just has the BIOS date. And we can add in additional ones directly from here. And then from that table, we can then go and see all the different CIs that are in this specific table. I only have 3 Windows servers in here. And then you can see all the different attributes that we have populated in this example, right? And then scroll through and see the different information that we need, and then see the relationship of them as well to the other devices. So CI Class Manager is your best friend. That's where you want to go to look at these different things, look at the hierarchies, understand what are the sources of this information, et cetera, et cetera. So let's get into CMDB population. So I know Kieran gave a high level of the slide, but I'm just going to walk through it in a little more detail. So first we have our services, right? Your technical services, your application services, your business services. These are your conceptual ideas of like, okay, this is what we're trying to accomplish with this infrastructure, with the software. From there, we have the actual configuration items, and these all need to get into the CMDB, right? That's our goal for the CIs that we've picked at least. So there's a couple different ways that we can go about adding this data to the CMDB. The first is ServiceNow discovery, right? So I'm going to go way more in depth into this in a section right after this. But this is really just a network scan, right? That goes in, goes out, finds the devices, creates a connection, and then pulls in the information that we want. But let's say that those devices have already been found by something else. Perfect example, SCCM. We already have SCCM deployed on all of our endpoints. And a lot of them maybe aren't living on our corporate network, right? Maybe they're not on the VPN and we can't discover them over the network. Well, fantastic. We have out-of-the-box connectors called Service Graph connectors that can then hook up to SCCM and import that data. And it's completely seamless, right? It's very, very easy to set up, and there's rules set around it, making it very clean, right? So when the data comes in, we're getting exactly the information that we want for that specific CI. And then from there, we have other ingestion methods as well. So I know Emily mentioned it very briefly, but our endpoint agent, so our personal is called ACC, Agent Client Collector. So that's another ingestion method. But then from there as well, just there's the option of APIs, right? So one example I see of from an asset perspective, not as much from CI, but from an asset perspective is integrating with your reseller for assets, right? So there's a lot of these out-of-the-box folks that we have in our ServiceNow store where you can connect with your reseller and they can import the asset data that you're buying straight from the PO, right? Just to give you an example. But this can also come from just manual entry as well, manually entering specific devices into the CMDB for, let's say, things that don't fit into these other categories. So once the data is ingested, that's when we hit IRE, Identification Reconciliation Engine. So that's something that ServiceNow has created to federate all these different sources to then understand that, okay, we have this CI that's coming in from SCCM. It's also coming in from Discovery. It's also coming in from this other place. Which attributes do we want? And who do we want to go to for specific attributes? Let's say the name, right? Let's say SCCM has one name for a specific device. Let's say ServiceNow is another name. What IRE can basically do is decide that, okay, for this specific attribute, let's take the name from Discovery. For something like CPU utilization, let's take it from SCCM. And then from there, we can find that specific device and understand that, okay, we have this information coming in, but we already have that CI record created from when we ran the scan last week, right? Let's tie this directly to that CI that has already been created with the idea of limiting duplication, right? So making sure that we have a clean CMDB that's tying back to the CI records that are already created and not causing this sprawl, right? This data sprawl. So from there, once that reconciliation is done, right, we have those CIs into ServiceNow, into the CMDB. And what do we do from there, right? That's where we do service mapping. So again, we're going to talk about this in more depth throughout this section. But the idea is that, hey, going all the way back to the example I said in the beginning, we have this web server that's powered by this database, that's behind this load balancer, that's then powering this, let's say, e-commerce website. These are all connected together. And so when the database goes down, let's just say, right, that's going to cause the web server to go down. That's going to cause the load balancer to go nowhere, right? And that's when you're going to get that 404 error. That's when incidents are going to come in. So having an understanding of that, hey, this database is what's powering this specific EC2, or I'm sorry, this specific web server, which is powering this business service of e-commerce website, is extremely important in streamlining root cause analysis, in understanding the impact of a change, right? Beyond just the service, but the actual CIs that are all connected to that web server, just for example. So that's what the next step that ServiceNow does. We get the CIs into ServiceNow, then we map out what they're doing. From there, we surface the data through different workspaces, different dashboards, etc. Idea being that, okay, we want to add insight for the IT team, for the operations team, for the different use cases that we have defined for ServiceNow. And then from there, we drive value, right? From a development standpoint and planning and building applications, then pushing them out, and the maintenance of site reliability and the overall operations team. And then from there, servicing, right? So, hey, something went down. Let's drive root cause analysis. Let's go and figure out what exactly caused this incident to happen. And then ideally from there, we have this nirvana state. So this is just another slide that I have around populating data. This is a little more simple, so I wanted to show it as well. But yeah, a lot of different ways that ServiceNow can ingest, right? From discovery, service graph connectors, that agent client collector I talked about, but then also REST API and manual entry, right? So for your very, very niche maybe tools that can't be discovered or we don't want to put on the network, we can absolutely manually enter them and update them. And once that's put into the CMDB, that's then how we drive value, right? Surfacing that data for service operations, for asset management, for the CMDB owners, and even for the service owners, right? This is something that we really commonly see, is that we have this distributed model where service owners own their application, but they don't necessarily own the infrastructure, right? That's owned by that operations team. And so giving them the ability to view like, okay, these are all the open incidents. These are all the open changes. This is everything that's going on with the service that I own. So then I can continue to keep doing what I do best. So I know somebody called it out in the beginning, right? Getting into like licensing and how this all works. So everything that I've shown from a discovery, from a service management standpoint, is all within this ITOM visibility SKU. Within there's a couple of hidden gems, right? There's firewall audit reporting, certificate management. So this is huge for managing TLS or SSL certificates on the devices themselves. Obviously, if those expire before getting new ones, that can cause huge outages. So making sure we manage those properly can be built right into the system. But then from there, right, service mapping, multi-source CMDB, we've kind of touched on those. We're going to touch on those more in depth throughout. And then ACC as well. And so what ITOM visibility truly does, right, is everything that I've been talking about, right? Pulling in that data into ServiceNow, mapping it out to the services that it supports, the business services that it supports, to then basically drive this outcome of a automated population of your CMDB, which can also discover things like homegrown applications, right? Or discover things like very, very niche software that maybe isn't commonly used or is homegrown, right? So that's all possible through ITOM visibility. Again, all with the idea of these greater use cases around service management, around asset management, both software and hardware, around security, incident, and vulnerability response. I think you guys can already start to see that, right, with that service mapping piece of understanding that, okay, if there's a CVE on that RDS that I talked about earlier, okay, that may affect the web server, that may affect the load balancer, that may affect everything else that's attached to that infrastructure. And then obviously is powering discovery and AIOps as well. So this can all be done through things like agent client collector, through discovery, etc. And having that endpoint agent that ServiceNow has can then power all of this. So just to give you one example of agent client collector, this is really, really powerful for something like software asset management in terms of software utilization. So reclaiming licenses for software that maybe isn't being used by your end users. agent client collector can go onto your device, track how often that specific user uses that, and then use that to push out workflows to go and reclaim that software. Let's say that software is downloaded, right? Well, we can kick off workflows to then run runbooks, right, on the actual device itself, and then remove that software to reclaim that license and obviously save some money. So I mentioned this earlier. This is honestly one of the kind of easiest ways to get started with ServiceNow, right? With ServiceNow CMDB is the Service Graph connectors. These are built by ServiceNow or ServiceNow partners. You can download them from the ServiceNow store, and they come pre-built with some of the common IRE rules already built into the connector. So it's a pretty simple process to set up. We have many that come out of the box. I'll show on the next slide. And that way you can import data like end user computing devices or networking devices or X, Y, and Z from these different sources that may already have that data, but then also import things like events, right? Events from your NMS tool. So ideally, that what this will do is drive healthy data, improved experience in terms of setting up the CMDB, and reduce the overall risk because of the fact that these connectors are certified by ServiceNow, right? We build them, we maintain them, we support them. And you can see that our connectors are very wide, right? It goes across cloud, network, monitoring, endpoint, security, etc. And to download them, right, you can go into the store.servicenow.com. For most of them, there is a guided setup, right? So let's say the Intune one, you download Intune from the application manager. From there, you can hit the setup button, and it walks you like step by step through how to set up that actual integration. And then if you go onto the store itself, go into the integration page and then filter by Service Graph connector, you can see a list of all of them, or you can search for the ones you want as well. So with that, let's go into discovery. So just at a high level, right, the idea behind discovery is to improve data accuracy across the CMDB, right? Import data into the CMDB, into ServiceNow CMDB by ServiceNow Discovery, right? And to reduce the manual effort and the custom integrations that we have to set up to get that data into the database that's obviously powering service management. So we have our discovery, which I'm going to be talking about the next couple of slides, but then we also have this idea of cloud discovery, where we can get service accounts from your AWS, your Azure, your different cloud providers, and then pull in that information into ServiceNow to then see that infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and function as a service, all within the ServiceNow CMDB, and have that tie back up to the web servers, the Windows servers, Linux servers that are supporting our services. So the way that discovery works is through this mid server, right? So this is your firewall. This is all within your corporate network. ServiceNow sits outside of that, right? We are a cloud platform, a subscription as a service. So we are sitting behind your firewall. So what we basically do is we take a host, right? So this is generally a Windows machine, can be Linux as well. And we install a very lightweight Java application, which is the mid server, right? So again, that sits on your side of the firewall and then goes out and does a network scan to then go and find all the different CIs in your environment. So again, this can be limited down by IP ranges. So that's going all the way back to the beginning of this idea of let's only start with what the use cases are, right? Let's only import the data that are tied directly to the use cases that we want to achieve out of the CMDB. So we can tie this to IP ranges, go out and do a port scan. Then from there, we can put in credentials into the mid server. It can communicate with that CI, establish a connection, and then pull in the information and the attributes that we want. And then that data gets sent back to ServiceNow to then upload into the CMDB. So one thing to note, right, I get this question all the time, like, is it going to be running a port scan all the time? No, right? The way that it works is it starts off by running that port scan. It finds the port that it has open, right? So generally, this is something like WMI or SSH or SNMP, right? And then it finds a credential that's associated with that type of CI. And then it creates an affinity. So every time we go, let's say we do this on a weekly basis, every time it goes to find that CI again, it knows exactly what port to hit, it knows exactly what credential to use. And then from there, we can basically have that information go into the mid server. The mid server stores that information and then sends it back to ServiceNow, where that IRE is run to make sure that, hey, if this printer that we found is already in the CMDB, let's update it with the newer information. If there is no new information, fantastic, right? And then from there, we can obviously go back out to your virtualization tools as well, right? Pull in that information from those virtualization tools, which I will explain in the next slide. So basically from here, right, whether that tool lives in the cloud, right, we can establish connections to the ServiceNow instance and then pull that information into the CMDB to then track alongside the CIs that we're finding through discovery. But then also from a virtualization standpoint in terms of on-prem, right? So we can pull in that information from VMware, from Google, from Kubernetes, and then tie that back to the infrastructure that is powering those services. So I mentioned this earlier, right? Going all the way back to my example of that Windows server to database to load balancer. That Windows server, or I'm sorry, that was a web server. Let's just say Windows server, right? That Windows server itself is going to have a lot of dependencies on it, right? It's going to have all the different file paths of the files that are running on that Windows server. Let's say there's a remote connection to another device. That's something else that we want to track as well. Let's look at all of the databases that are attached to that Windows server itself. So what we can basically see in ServiceNow Discovery is this dependencies map, right, of all the different infrastructure that's supporting this Windows server, and then the connections between those, right, from host to component, application to host, application to application. And this is going to be very, very important as we go to do that incident management, right? So for example, if a specific file system is what was changed, that's what caused like an incident, right? Being able to see how these relationships are, what these relationships are, and then how they map back up to the device that's down is extremely important in determining what actually causes incident and then going and remediating it. So this is the level of granularity that our discovery goes in, again, with the idea of tying back to all the outcomes we hope to drive from a tool like this. So I talked a lot in the beginning about cloud. I talked a lot about that discovery concept, right? But when we're doing discovery, right, there's this idea of OS level discovery. So finding that Apache web server, finding the load balancer that's tied to it, finding all of the Linux servers that are powering it. But let's say this is powered in AWS, right? Let's say this is run in different areas, right? Different cloud providers. We want to know everything, right? When we're talking about root cause analysis, when we're talking about change management, we want to know everything that's tying back to this overarching service, right? This SAP financial accounts. So what we can do is basically first run the discovery on your side, right? So that SNMP is going out to find that load balancer, the SSH is finding the Linux server, WMI is finding the Windows server. Then on the cloud side, we can then run cloud discovery with the services accounts to then find the AWS data centers, the EC2s that are running this Windows server or this Linux server, the VPC that's powering all of this, right? And have that context and that information to then know when, okay, if US East for whatever reason goes down, that's going to cause all of these things over here to go down as well. And that's how we can track back what exactly is causing this specific incident. So this is what creates that holistic approach, right, of both this OS level discovery and the virtualization discovery, which then can go all back to the ServiceNow instance and be tracked from a service management standpoint. Last thing I'll say from a discovery standpoint is, we talked earlier, I gave that example of file-based, right? Of, hey, there's a file that maybe was changed and that caused an outage. ServiceNow can track all the way down to that level to then give you an idea of, hey, what exactly happened in this change to then cause this issue, right? And we can see that post-change of, hey, at this specific time before the change went through, these things were off. Then after the change, they were turned on. And that's what caused the CPU utilization to jump through the roof. That's what caused people to not be able to access that specific application. So this is what we need to go and fix as we're going to resolve this specific incident. So from here, we're going to start talking about service mapping. So we talked a lot about ITOM discovery. We talked about how we can get that information into the CMDB. Now let's talk about how we can map that up to drive those business outcomes that we want to achieve. So the way that service mapping works, and actually let's go back to this slide since we already looked at it. The way that service mapping works is we can basically, the most common approach top down, what we could do is basically go in through this entry point of, let's say, a load balancer, right? That load balancer connects back out to this Apache web server, that connects back to this Linux server. And then we can track how these connect, right? And then create a map of this and then tie that back up to that business service, right? And have that all that information populate up to the business service and then track things like total number of incidents on that service or track how much money are we spending to maintain that service, right? and then drive those business level metrics, which then obviously in a circle way go and help us, right, fight for, hey, we need to expand the CMDB, or we need to add more use cases because we have this level of reporting on that VP level, on that director level. But that's basically how service mapping works, right? It's HTTPS connections that connect these devices together. And then we track that, put them into a map, and then allow you to understand the full context of what's going on. So then when something like this Linux server goes down, we can track how that affects everything else. And so we can see that in a more complex environment here, where you see this information goes down to this, goes down to this.
Can I interject real quick?
Yeah.
Uh, So, sorry. I just want to say from a service mapping perspective, that's traditional service mapping for app-based service mapping. As we're moving into more comprehensive service delivery systems across operational technology, manufacturing, retail services, utilizing things like tag service mapping and additional tools like T&I to do circuit mapping for ISP and telephony situations. Realistically, the idea of a service map has changed to a service instance, and the instance is a service delivery system and all the components that make it up. In data centers, we're doing power chains, we're doing HVAC systems. So it's really expanding. When we talk about traditional service mapping, there's this part of it that's app specific. But as we move into things like tag-based service mapping, the capabilities are expanding quite a bit. I just wanted to call that out real quick.
Yeah, that's a good call out. But yeah, I guess into my next part as well, of like the different types of service mapping.
Hey, Suhaib, real quick, just a quick time check. Maybe about 5 to 10 more minutes. You good with that?
Yeah, it should be good.
Okay, and then we'll take a 10-minute break.
Sounds good. But yeah, different types of service mapping, right? Top down is the one I was talking about earlier, but then from there as well, we can go into machine learning, which then takes all the data in your ServiceNow CMDB and helps create the maps for you. So this is extremely powerful. But then from there, we can do tag-based and dynamic CI groups as well, which are a little more kind of manual, right? We set rules for how we want these services to be mapped, and then ServiceNow goes, finds where those rules apply, and then puts those maps together. So we'll send the deck out after this on all this information. And so this kind of just hits on what's best for what situation, right? Again, we'll send this out afterwards as well. This just dives a little bit deeper into tag-based, but I want to get into this side. So we talked about discovery, we talked about service mapping, right? Where I see a lot of people or a lot of organizations fall short is they start off with a discovery, right? They set up their service graph connectors, they set up a ServiceNow discovery, they put it against the IP ranges that they want, and they have the information come in. And that's fantastic for some of these earlier use cases, right, that you run into. But then where we see people plateau from a maturity perspective is not moving towards this service mapping approach of, okay, we got the discovery and we got the CI classes that we wanted. What's next? It's actually understanding how they relate together, right? Going all the way, going to that service mapping piece that I was talking about and seeing that, okay, this yellow relates to this red, relates to this blue, relates to this purple, so on and so forth. And so when we're looking at a service, we can see that, okay, these things, these other CIs that are also Windows servers, are also load balancers, aren't relevant to the incident that we're working on or to the change that we're working on because we have those relationships mapped together. So this is really, really important to creating that holistic CMDB. And the Service Mapping Plus, which has that machine learning tied within it, is on the store. You can download it, and this does really help speed up that time to getting your first service maps made. From here, I'm going to quickly show what these service maps look like. Again, it's going to be pretty similar to what you saw in the screenshots. But the idea is that we can eventually get to this point of this service dashboard where you can see all the different services, see what's up and running, and then from there, drill into a specific service. So if we're going to e-payment, for example, and see the service map, and then be able to see that, okay, there's this mapped application which relates up to all these business level things, right? These offerings, the actual overall service, but then tie back down to all the different components that make up that service, right? Like, for example, that Apache web server, and then go and view the actual topology of that web server and see those different file paths that are related to it, and then really track back to what it actually is causing an issue. And if you guys go from visibility to event management, which is the next SKU higher, we can track those events that are tied directly to this to then see that, okay, once an event pops up on this specific file system. That's going to affect the web server. That's going to affect everything that we have here. And that's going to all tie back up to this greater overarching service. And where we've taken this a step farther is through our artificial intelligence and how we can basically track that, okay, each one of these components has a baseline, has a standard of, okay, this is how these things normally run. Usually around, let's say November, Amazon probably shoots the roof in terms of usage, right? Because everyone's buying their Christmas presents. That's standard operating procedure. As soon as something starts to deviate from that baseline, we can trigger an anomaly to then understand that, okay, there's something going wrong with this specific service and all things that are affected by it. Let's create it. Let's create this alert before it even goes down, before there's an incident, before somebody goes to Amazon.com and sees a 404, right? And so we're able to do that with our artificial intelligence, which is one SKU higher. So wanted to call that out. Fantastic. Last section we're going to hit on is identification and reconciliation. But this all ties back to this concept of multi-source CMDB, right? So I talked about it earlier where you can have multiple different sources feeding the same configuration item. So you can see in this example, right? Maybe you have the first data source being ServiceNow discovery, then SCCM, then some third party, then let's say it's manual entry, right? When you have all these different things feeding into the CI, that's fantastic, right? That's not a bad thing at all. In fact, I have customers that have 20 different data sources for one CI. That's extremely important because there's sometimes certain attributes that you can't get with one tool that you need for X, Y, and Z use case, right? Again, this can all tie back to your goals, your outcomes that you want to drive. What IRE basically does is it takes this information from these different data sources, identifies first what CI are we talking about, and then from there reconciles that, hey, from discovery, we want to pull the name. From SCCM, we want to pull the CPU utilization. From this third party, we want to pull running software is installed, just as an example, right? And so identification and reconciliation is what allows all of this to happen. So then as we scale the CMDB and as we start to bring in more use cases, we don't clog up the CMDB and make it extremely noisy, right? And so you can see that identification and reconciliation process. And then this is what also ties back to duplication, right? If we have duplicate CIs or reclassification where we have CIs reclassified when they maybe shouldn't be. And so within all of this, what this all leads to is this idea of a golden CI, right? We have the right information from ServiceNow discovery, from service graph connectors, feeding into the reconciliation rules to then create this golden CI where we have certain attributes created by discovery, certain attributes created by Tanium, certain attributes created by Jamf, and then we have the single source of truth that we all want to get to, right? Which overall creates this outcome of improving identification from multiple data sources, but then also driving incident management and driving change management and driving development. Emily, how are we doing on time? You think I can?
Can I chime in on that real quick before we go
Yeah.
forward? All right, so one of the keys of multi-source is not just creating the golden CI for the workflows itself, although that's extremely useful, but you have the related content from all your different sources. Whatever your last scan was of each of your sources is going to show up in the multi-source tables. And ServiceNow is beginning to become not just the reflection of the source of truths in your environment, but the ability to actually govern how well you're doing in your environment. Think, if you have CrowdStrike agents that are supposed to be deployed across a certain amount of different endpoints, and you have SCCM showing 20% more endpoints than CrowdStrike is showing. The ability to govern and showcase that with CMDB 360 actually is allowing folks to use the CMDB as the de facto standard for where there are gaps in other systems in the organization. So I know you were going to move into refactoring too. You can also, if you decide a source of truth has gotten corrupted or changed in some way, shape, or form for a specific attribute, you can on the fly recompute all of the CIs to use a different source of truth for said attribute at any point in time without having to do a lot of configuration on the back end or clean things up. So multi-source is a huge capability that's really important, and a lot of people don't take as much advantage of it as they can, but more and more organizations are starting to adopt.
Absolutely. Those are all great call outs. But again, to get multi-source right, you have to make sure you get IRE right as well, right? Just so we don't have sprawl around it. Emily, should we end it off there or should we touch on IRE real quick in the instance? Are you on mute?
I was on mute. There we go. I can't remember, Candarp, are we going over IRE in our section or should we cover it here?
Yeah, I think it's good to cover it.
Yeah, let's spend maybe 4 minutes or so here.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to show. But in that CI class manager itself, right, this is where you set the IRE rules, and you usually set them against a specific CI class, right? Which logically makes sense as well. So first, you start off with the identification rules, where you go and basically say that, okay, if the CI name lines up with the name in the CI record, right? Let's make sure that we tie it back to the CI that's already been created, right? Let's say we discovered the CI last week. We want to make sure that we update that CI. We don't create a new one. So that's what identification does. And then we can see that you can basically put what attribute you want to tie it back to. So a common one might be like serial number or MAC address, right? The things that are going to be unique, right? Think of like almost like a primary key for that CI, which then allows us to then update that. From there, we get into reconciliation rules, which is where we can decide what attributes come in from that multi-source concept, right? So let's go ahead and add one right now, and I can show you where you can basically create a static reconciliation rule that just runs every time, or you can do dynamic ones. Like for example, use case for dynamic may be for CPU utilization. It doesn't matter what source is coming from. We want the most updated one, right? But for static, let's say specifically for name, we only want the name coming in from ServiceNow Discovery. And to set these up, very simple, right? You start off by selecting the discovery source, the priority of it. So the lower the priority, the higher priority it is. And then you select the attribute that you want. So let's say CPU speed. Oh, shoot, I picked default gateway. All right, whatever, we can do that too. And then you can set filter conditions. So we only want this to run for, let's say, we can do like assigned to is somebody. That's just an example, but like we could max this out by different business groups that it's associated to. And so that way we can filter out that CI class as well, right? Because again, the class, think of class like a computer. That's going to be huge. We're going to have a lot of different things within there. So being able to filter these reconciliation rules allows us to only hit one specific group. Again, going all the way back to that first slide of, hey, what are our use cases? Let's center what we put into the CMDB around those use cases. So again, we can set those filters around the reconciliation rules and then get really, really creative and intricate in how we have this data funnel into the CMDB. So this is one of the biggest misses that I see in the environment, right? A lot of people don't put as much time into IRE or don't do it at all. And that's what causes the noise within the CMDB and what causes a lot of people to not get the value that they want out of it. And then eventually shift away from it, right? So we want to make sure that this is rock solid in that planning phase as we go to populate data into ServiceNow. But that ends off my section. I think I have a thank you slide in here potentially. Oh, it's just a ServiceNow slide. All right. Thank you guys for the time.
Candarp, thank you, or Suhaib, thank you so much. All right, team, we are going to, I'm going to share my screen. We're going to take a quick 10-minute break. I know it's been a lot of content. I'll put up a little timer here and we will come back here in just a minute. There we go. All right, we are back here. Hope everybody had a quick 10-minute break. I know we've been covering a lot of content here, tons of good questions in the Q&A panel. So with that, Candarp, we're going to go through our last section, which is really around all of the data governance pieces. And then once we get done with that, we'll kind of round out any overall questions, and then we'll share how the labs work. We'll talk about how you can get your lab instances. And then I will end with all of the resources to help make your journey on ServiceNow and even CMDB, kind of all of the resources, a success. And then we will be done here just in an hour. So with that, Candarp, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you.
All right, awesome. So first of all, we're almost at the end of the session, so thanks for hanging on. We're going to be done shortly. And I have the pleasure of talking about data governance, which arguably is probably the most important aspect of this because, as we all know, the CMDB, while a powerful tool and application that's available, but taking care of it and sort of making sure that the data within the CMDB is accurate is a very challenging task. And I think data governance is a big part of that, and making sure you have the right pieces in place will help you stay successful when it comes to the CMDB. So data foundations is a team engagement, right? Establishing ownership, assigning responsibilities, defining what good looks like. All of these things are very important to the success of the CMDB and also all the processes that rely on the CMDB. So for this part of the workshop, we're going to be focusing on two aspects. First is going to be data governance, where I'm going to be bringing up some of the things that we've already talked about and mentioned a few times during the course of this workshop. And then we're going to be talking about all the tools that are available to you to actually make sure you've got good governance in place. And then these tools are going to help you stay on track and keep the CMDB healthy. So I'm going to bring up this slide again, and Karen already went through this at the beginning, but I wanted to stress sort of the importance of the different aspects that go into making sure your CMDB is in a great place, right? And we know ingestion is a very important part of it, right? The mechanisms by which you're bringing the data into CMDB, all the configurations that go into place, the technical expertise. But I think it's very important to emphasize the people aspect of this whole thing, right? So first and foremost, starting with leadership vision, talking about aligning the business objectives and the goals back to the mechanisms and things that you're doing within the CMDB are very important. And then standardizing and centralizing sort of everything out to what value you're looking to drive is very important. And it's very important part of the puzzle in making sure that you have the right people and the right influence to actually try and do what you're trying to achieve with the business. The same goes with governance, right? With the idea of getting the right people in place, putting people and process together, and then you have all the technology and the tools available to you. But all of that sort of fails if you don't have the right people and process working together. And I know Michael made a very important point. A lot of customers, uh, they do a great job of ingesting the data, right? They've got discovery working, they've got service graph connectors deployed. You've got a ton of data within the CMDB, and then a few months into their journey, they find that there's a lot of data, but there's not a lot going on, right? There's not a lot of value that's being driven. And the key factor here is you don't have a good governance in place, and that's what we're going to be talking about. So let's talk about the 6 steps to successful data foundations. And Karen already went through this, but I think it's very important to reestablish the first 4 steps as a part of this. Where step 1 is we're trying to align back to the business objectives, right? We're trying to align back to what the leadership of your organization is trying to achieve. We're defining your goals, your outcomes, and then based on that, you're defining and establishing governance. And then that is where you start bringing in data into the CMDB. You start building out workflows tying it back to processes like incident and change management. But if you don't do steps 1, 2 through 4 successfully, then you're eventually going to head to this place where the CMDB just is a database with a lot of data, but no one can really make sense of it, or it's not really driving the value that you set out to do. And so when we talk about getting the right people in place, just like with everything in the platform, we recommend taking it slow and applying a method, which in this case, crawl, walk, run, right? So when we talk about starting off your CMDB journey, or if you've already started and you sort of need to reestablish and go back to baseline, step one is to identify stakeholders that are working on business objectives, but also trying to understand how the CMDB will help them get there, right? So I like to use the example of my own customers in the tech and telco space, where in specifically telcos, they're trying to drive better customer service, right? At the end of the day, customers are core to their organization. And so for them, a good customer service really just means proactive customer service. And so that's their business objective. And that is what sort of the core of the organization is focused on: delivering services, delivering value to their end customers. And so in that example, you may want to identify key stakeholders that are responsible for driving that objective, folks that are putting pen to paper, so to speak. These are the people that you want to have involved within your CMDB journey, right? They're going to help you drive your initiatives forward. They're going to help you sell the value of the vision or the platform to the business. And that is also going to help you get leadership engagement. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in terms of a steering committee. But the idea is you start small, start effective, and then from there you try to identify more use cases, areas of improvements within the business, and then you expand from there, eventually leading to more of a long-term strategic roadmap where you're trying to drive platform-wide improvements, and then using the CMDB sort of as the bedrock or the foundation to do so. So when we talk about governance and really making sure that you have a good decision-making process in place, steering committee is how we recommend it, right? So a steering committee is built up of folks within the organization, folks that are IT leaders within the business, folks that have the power or the ability to make strategic decisions, but they're also responsible for a part of the business. These are the folks that you would want within your CMDB steering committee, because they're the ones that are going to be able to articulate the value of the CMDB and align it back to the strategic initiatives. Most importantly, and I think this is where a lot of folks, organizations struggle, is getting buy-in, right? Getting buy-in early with executives is very important. And at the end of the day, they're not necessarily concerned with the features, the functionality of the platform, but what they really care about is, how is the CMDB going to help me achieve what I've set out to achieve, right? How is it going to help me achieve these strategic initiatives? And so getting buy-in early involves getting buy-in from the perspective of what they care about, right? What are they trying to achieve, and how is the CMDB going to help them get there? And so getting buy-in early will help you create that credibility and trust. And then when you need resources, when you need support, and when you need funding to try and do these things, having these people on your side is going to be very crucial, as you sort of mature and scale across the platform. And so once again, like, the important note here is with that executive buy-in, you're not going to have the support you need. You're not going to have the influence to drive cultural change, which in the end will result in a low adoption just across the platform. And so this sort of covers the people aspect, right? Get those stakeholders in, get the steering committee established, right? Get the leadership approval and buy-in early, and then make sure you're aligning everything back to some sort of business or strategic initiative. And then from there, once you've got the people in place, the question really becomes, what about the data model, right? Where do we start? What sort of data do we want within the CMDB? And so once again, we're bringing this because this is very important. You want to start simple and grow from there, right? I think a lot of customers struggle with having a lot of data within the CMDB. They don't know how to make sense of it all. And so then the question becomes, what is important to you? What is important to the processes? And that is where the concept of principal CI classes come in, right? So you're starting small, you're identifying CI classes and attributes that you need to support the workflows and use cases within the business. I think within the chat, people were throwing incident management change and problem around. That's a great example, right? What are the CI classes and attributes that you would want to indicate on an incident or a change request? That is where you want to focus on and start off with. And then from there, you start to sort of expand and identify more use cases and more attributes that you need to drive decisions and workflows. And then you sort of grow and scale out your principal classes from there. So if I look at an example, from the perspective of telcos, right? For them, their infrastructure is very important, right? Their infrastructure is how they deliver services to their end customer. So as an example, their network devices are very crucial and it's core to their operations. And so they may say that their core network infrastructure is very important because it helps drive and service their customers. And so for them, that is something that they want to prioritize and effectively manage. So for them, that might be a principal CI class or a set of CI classes that they want to start off with. And then from there, you sort of grow and scale as necessary. And once again, these are just examples in front of you. But then at the end of the day, it all comes down to your business and what objectives you've identified and what processes you're trying to target. And so when we put all this stuff together and we talk about successful data foundations, we can sort of summarize it into three pillars. So Habe talked about ingest, right? Bringing data in. But I think more importantly, what we're talking about today is sort of the governance and insight aspect. And we have mechanisms in place, tools and functionality that is available to you to make sure you can effectively govern what is the CMDB and the CSDM. Now, I do want to stress, right, these are tools. And so for step one, get the people in order, get the people in place. And so as you look through, and we're going to go into the instance and talk about these things, but don't forget that important message of people, process, technology. So when we talk about these three pillars, ingestion, governance, and insight, we have something we offer called the CMDB workspace, where we sort of take these three pillars and operationalize it into a single workspace so that you have everything available to you from a best practice configuration management perspective. So we're going to go into the instance here, but the workspace allows you to do a few things from intelligence search capabilities to managing your data sources, and then also managing the health of the CMDB. So this is going to be a very powerful tool that you want to note down right now, but this is where we're going to get a lot of that value and then also manage the governance aspect of the CMDB. So I'm going to go ahead and switch screens for a second and go into the instance. So this is the CMDB workspace. The CMDB workspace has different views and different things you can click on, but the main benefits and the key features of the CMDB workspace expand across CMDB Health, the CMDB Data Manager, and the CMDB 360. So the CMDB workspace is a centralized modern way for you to manage the CMDB and CMDB Health, but it's also a way for you to manage important aspects of your CI lifecycle, as well as things like tasks that you may spin up and build out for managing the lifecycle of a CI. So for example, within the CMDB and within the CI lifecycle, there's different aspects of the CI that you're trying to manage, right? Everything from certification to deletion to retirement. All these workflows and processes are going to be managed by the people that are involved from a governance perspective, right? And so because you want to ensure that there's some sort of responsibility and ownership that exists within the organization, you're going to be looking at assigning tasks, stuff like certification tasks to the right groups and right owners, so that you're making sure that the work that is assigned and people that are responsible are actually going ahead and doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so within the CMDB workspace, you're able to manage not only your tasks, but other tasks within the CI lifecycle. And this is going to be very important because at the end of the day, the CMDB is ever growing, it's ever changing. And so these tasks are going to be very important to make sure that you're managing the health of the data within the CMDB. We can also go ahead and manage the data within that, which we're going to go into in a second. But you're going to also look at important actions here, right? These actions, once again, are there to help you manage the CI lifecycle from everything like deduplication to managing duplicate CIs and orphan CIs, as well as approvals and attestation tasks. All these things are going to be available to you in a single workspace. You also have the ability to do search capabilities, right? The CMDB is going to be full of a ton of data. And so being able to quickly query the information that you need is very important. And so the intelligent search functionality allows you to search the data within the CMDB using natural language. And so this way we're able to make it very easy for folks that maybe don't understand the data model deeply, but they need to be able to pull and query information. They're going to be able to do so just using simple natural language. And so we're also able to take a step back and look at things like your service graph connectors from this place, right? So we talked about the importance of multi-source. We talked about the importance of using service graph connectors to pull data into the CMDB, and you have that sort of CMDB 360 aspect. And so this is also the place where you're going to be able to manage your connections, right? Everything from your integrations down to the transform, and then also explore any connectors that you haven't enabled and should start looking into as you explore that multi-source CMDB strategy. In addition to that, you're also able to manage sort of that discovery and the different sources of truth within the platform as well from something we call the CMDB 360. So CMDB 360 provides you sort of the aggregate analysis of your different data sources in a single space so that you're able to manage the different aspects and the different methods by which you're bringing data into the platform. So the CMDB 360 view will help to manage the different sources and then also help you identify proactively if there's any issues with the different discovery sources as well. Now, one of the things that I do want to emphasize here is, when you're starting off, you're going to have sort of your key data sources, right? You have your IRV process in place to make sure that the data is accurate and clean. And then as you start to scale and grow, you're going to have these different sources that you want to manage. And so as you start to explore service graph connectors or starting to build and implement more, just don't forget that we want to make sure that you have some sort of oversight and governance in place so that you're managing your sources of data, as this is where your problems start, right? A bad source of data with poor process in place just lead to poor data within the CMDB. And then that in all just doesn't provide value that you've initially set out to achieve. And then as you continue to scale and adopt more within the CMDB, we have the insight tabs that allows you to understand your adoption across the CMDB holistically, right? So from looking at data ingestion, right? How are you looking from a perspective of adopting the different methods and various options that you have in terms of data ingestion? How are you doing in terms of your service graph connectors? And then looking at sort of your CIs, whether they're processed through the IRE processor or not. And if not, then that gives you an action to go ahead and sort of adhere to best practice. You're also able to look at it from a data governance perspective, right? So there's a ton of tools that we're going to talk about shortly that are available to you for data governance. And so as you look to scale, you also want to look at what you're adopting, right? Are you using the different features and functionality that's available to you? So for example, the data manager, very important to manage your CI lifecycle. Why haven't we adopted this? And if not, let's go ahead and build out a strategy to start adopting these features because that's going to make your life easier when it comes to that CI and CMDB data governance. And then lastly, we have your search and analytics, which we're going to talk about a little bit shortly, but adopting these functionality makes the data within the CMDB more accessible to your end users. And then also just makes the CI data more applicable and more valid when it comes to processes like incident management, change management, et cetera, et cetera. With that said, let's go into the data management. So the management view within the CMDB workspace gives your team and your admins quick access into key management tools, such as your data manager, CMDB groups, and dynamic CI groups. But mostly the idea is we're looking at it from the perspective of CI health here, right? We want to look at your CIs. We want to look at it from a health perspective. We want to understand, where does your data lie? What does your duplicate data look like? Do we have CIs that are orphans or that are stale? These are all data points that we want to go in and fix and address, right? How are we doing that? Once again, we're creating these CI policies, CI lifecycle policies, and creating tasks and assigning tasks to the people within your stakeholder groups. And so not only are we identifying issues, but we're now actually going and assigning the work to the right people so that we can go ahead and correct and proactively manage the data within the CMDB. From here, we can go into the data manager, right? The data manager allows you to build out policies and use a policy-driven framework for managing your CI lifecycle, right? So everything uh, from deletion to retirement to things like certifications, right? We have folks that manage certain CIs within the business, right? They're responsible for your hardware assets. We have folks that are responsible for your Windows servers, right? We want to make sure that we have them involved when it comes to certifying the data, but also managing the CI lifecycle from end to end. And how do we do that? What we do that by creating out these scheduled policies and creating out tasks and subtasks so that we have the right people involved. And we're making sure that, we're not only identifying bad data, but we're actually going in and correcting the data itself. Within the data manager, we can also go ahead and create new policies, right? So we could create policies, like I said, across the CF lifecycle. We had some folks in the chat talking about retirement and deletion. This is where you're going in and really defining what you as the business want to do when it comes to deletion, when it comes to certification. The idea is every organization is different, right? And so for your organization, retiring data may be different from a different organization. And so this is where you're going to be able to really make the governance aspect truly your own, right? You're going to be able to define what the CMDB governance looks like for your business. And how do we do that? Once again, by getting the right people involved, right? By getting the right stakeholders, by aligning it back to a business objective. This is how you're going to be able to truly define what these policies mean for the business. We can also go ahead and define retirement definitions, right? Once again, what does the retirement policy look like for your business, right? From a hardware asset perspective, you may get this sort of process from your asset management team, right? You may want to understand how they're managing the hardware asset lifecycle, how they're managing the retirement policies. And then we're using that input and then defining what the retirement policies look like. And then this is where you're going to be able to sort of go ahead and do that. And then lastly, I'm going to just go back into sort of the CMDB groups and dynamic CI groups. We haven't really touched on this too much in detail, but one of the ways that we're managing the data within the CMDB, right, is we talked about it, principal classes, right? That's how we're differentiating between the data that we care about, the data that we're using within our workflows, and then the rest of the data within the CMDB, right? So there's no excuse that we have too much data, we don't know what to do with it. Well, we want to go ahead and sort of prioritize the data that we care about. Another way that we're able to do that is by creating these dynamic CI groups, right? So a very simple way to look at it is, right, maybe we want to collectively group all of our Windows servers so that we're able to better manage the entirety of our Windows servers, and then filter out anything that we don't need to see or don't need to manage, right? This is also, by the way, one of the ways you can create service maps without using service mapping, where you could create a dynamic CI group for an application that the business cares about. And so instead of having to manage individual CIs or work with individual CIs, we can go ahead and create these dynamic groups so we can manage it, all of it holistically, and all of it together. I'm going to pause here. I know, Michael, you had a few thoughts on this, and I know this is something that's deep to you, but anything you want to add? I'm not sure if Michael's actually online, so maybe I should have checked first. Okay.
He might have stepped away there, Candor.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah,
Yeah.
so maybe we'll revisit this because I think at the end of the day, um, the governance is often the most overlooked aspect, but arguably it is the most important aspect because the CMDB is a living, breathing thing. And so having the right policies in place are going to be very important. Okay, so I'm going to go back into the slides for a second because there was a lot of stuff that I covered, and I do want to talk about sort of the theory when it comes down to it. So I'm going to swipe back into the slides here, and we're going to talk about the CMDB Data Manager. Right. So, like I said, the CMDB Data Manager is where you're going to be managing your data, your CIs from a bulk governance perspective across its life cycle. So from everything from retirement to deletion, from certification, attestation, et cetera, et cetera. And so that really may differ with every organization. So let's look at an example, very simple, where we want to look at our hardware asset, in this case, computers. And we want to say that as a business, we want to retire computers that don't have an assigned owner and have not been updated in the last 180 days, right? And so this requirement may come from a different part of the business, right? This may come from your asset management team, as they are the ones that are responsible for the physical hardware, from everything from procurement to retirement to archival, et cetera, et cetera. And so they may define this requirement as a business. And so you want to take this asset requirement and translate it into some sort of CMDB policy, right? And so that the way you're going to do that is through the CMDB data manager, through these specific policies. Similarly, you may have a containerized environment where you want to delete containers which have not been discovered in the last week, right? Because you're constantly spinning up, spinning down these things. And so for a fast-moving environment, you may want to define a policy so that you're deleting anything that does not exist within your environment. This is how you're managing the data within the CMDB, right? This is how you're avoiding the common pitfall of, hey, we have a ton of data. Some of it honestly doesn't exist anymore, right? Some of these servers no longer are operational. Some of these laptops are no longer within our inventory. How do we do that? We do that through the CMDB data manager and through these data policies. So just making sure that that makes sense. And so if you have any thoughts or if anyone in the call here has ideas, throw them in the chat, right? Happy to see what you guys are thinking about. What sort of policies would you think about in terms of your business? And then maybe that's where you start to take a look, right? That's where you start to define what your governance will look like from some of these low-hanging fruits, and then you scale from there. Now, when we talk about data certification, this is also a very important aspect of it because oftentimes when it comes to data within the CMDB, uh, a different business unit or different team may be the responsible party for making sure that the data and the attributes within each of these CIs is relevant, it's accurate. They're also the ones that would better define what sort of attributes are important, what sort of attributes are required or mandatory. And so when we have these people involved with when it comes to data governance, they're also going to be the ones that are going to be certifying the data as well, right? And so the way we do that is through these scheduled policies and tasks where we're creating certification tasks, assigning it to the right team, in this case for the example of hardware assets, right? We want to make sure the asset management team has been involved. We want to create certification policies and then create tasks and assign it to the asset management team so that they're not only involved and they have visibility, but they're actually responsible for the quality of the data within the CMDB, right? And so now we're getting folks involved. They've got skin in the game. They're actually responsible for the quality of the data. And so when we go back and look at the health of the CMDB, we can point and say, okay, we've got poor data quality for our hardware CIs and assets, right? Who is a responsible person? Let's work with them to figure out what is the best way we can make sure the quality of the data is at 100%. And so we're getting people sort of involved early and often. That's the main goal when it comes to governance, right? We've identified our stakeholders. We've identified the people that are going to be sources of input when it comes to our ingestion processes and the data attributes and the data information. And we also want to keep them involved when it comes to the upkeep of that data. That is what it's all about when it comes to governance. Okay, so let's talk about CMDB health. So CMDB health is all about managing the CMDB data from a health perspective. We typically define these things into three categories or three facets of completeness, compliance, and correctness. Now, the definitions are standard, but this differs for every single business, right? So when we say completeness, we're talking about, do these records have the required and recommended fields, right? How are we defining these recommended and required fields? This is where we're working with the business to understand what do they need to manage their workflows, right? When we're talking about servers, what are the attributes that we need to do effective change management, right? To do effective, vulnerability management. What are the attributes that your security team is looking at to do their work? That is the input that we're looking at to define what completeness means for your business. In a similar fashion, compliance, where we're looking at sort of the predefined policies that we've talked about when it comes to CMDB data, all these policies and sort of predefined audits, they're being driven by requirements of the business, right? Requirements from the folks that are responsible for the CI classes or responsible for your servers, responsible for your assets. Once again, this definition is going to be configured and defined based on what your organization has deemed important. And then lastly, we have correctness. So once again, these are rules that we've predefined, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit. But this could be anything from your identification rules to what constitutes an orphan CI or a stale CI. All these attributes, once again, are defined based on how your business is managing them. So I use the example of containerized environments, right? In a containerized world, you have containers being spun up, spun down. They're constantly changing. Discovery is constantly discovering new containers, and then identifying any containers that are no longer within your environment. And so all of these sort of rules are going to be defined by how your business is managing your containerized environment. And so once again, while the CMDB Health Dashboard has these three facets that we're looking at, each of these facets really determine or define what your business cares about or what your business is really focused on when it comes to the CMDB and the data within it. So I'm going to go ahead and swap over really quickly into the instance just to show you what that looks like. So the CMDB Health Dashboard, like I said, is all about these three facets, completeness, correctness, and compliance. And so the idea is we're looking at this metric or KPI, and we're looking at it and saying, well, okay, look, we've gone ahead and defined what completeness means for us. We've gone ahead and defined what compliance means for us. Now we want to make sure we have eyes on the CMDB Health Dashboard at all times, right? Because we want to make sure that we're being proactive about our CMDB, right? And the way we're going to be doing that is if we have folks that are going in and making sure that our completeness scores are at an acceptable level. If we have folks that are looking into the compliance scores. If they dip below what we've defined as an appropriate target, then we want to go in and understand, okay, where are we failing? Where have we gone wrong? Is it because we have business applications that are missing key information, right? In this case, they're missing ownership information, right? Do we have endpoints that are missing key information? If so, we now need to go ahead and identify who the responsible party is and then task them with going in and correcting these issues, right? And so it's not about, it's a KPI. It's a KPI that's allowing you to be more proactive, right? It's a way for you to step in and say, hey, we need to do something and correct our process. We want to correct the policies within the data manager, right? Maybe redefine the policies. We want to redefine what retirement is, what stale CIs are. And then we want to do that proactively before you end up with a CMDB that's filled with unreliable data. And so now all of a sudden, all the teams that are relying on it are no longer able to drive value, right? Your change management team is no longer able to effectively assess the risk of your changes. Your incident management team is no longer associating incidents with CIs, with services, with servers, et cetera, et cetera. And so if we are proactive, then the rest of the business will continue to derive value. And then once again, you're going to be able to deliver and sell the value to the rest of the business. And then that's how you keep everyone happy. That's how you keep your leaders happy. And then that's how you continue to get support and buy-in from the rest of the organization. The same thing exists for recommended attributes. Once again, this is available to you guys today. So just I implore you to look into this. I implore you to look into all of these things that we've talked about. And then once again, start slow, start with the crawl, walk, run aspect. Okay, so we're going to talk about what these completeness rule or these rules and how you can manage these rules. So I'm going to go back to my slides for a second. And we're going to talk about sort of recommendations and best practice. So when it comes to CMDB health, right, there's some guidelines and general recommendations, and we have a ton of resources on this as well, which we're going to share with you at the end of the session. But typically, right, before you start with the health dashboard, you want to start with the rules that define the metrics within the health dashboard, right? So what does that mean? Well, you want to start looking at your inclusion rules, right? What are the CIs that you're actually looking to manage? What are the CIs that the health dashboard is going to report on? And so that's where you want to start step one, right? We don't really want to manage every single data piece in the CMDB. That's an impossible task, right? So we start small and we start with our, once again, your principal CI classes. And then these are the CI classes that we want to manage from a governance perspective. That's what health inclusion rules are going to be about. Next, we're going to have required and recommended fields. Once again, we go back to our principal CI classes. What are the attributes that we want? What are the attributes that we need to be able to do incident management? What are the attributes and fields we need to be able to do effective change management, right? These are your recommended required fields. This is what's going to drive your CMDB health metrics. This is what you're going to better define and start early before you start looking at your CMDB health. And then once again, staleness rules, we talked about this, right? Defining what old is. Are we talking about assets without assigned owners, right? That have been in the system for 160 days. Is that your definition, right? This goes back to what your business defines, but you're going to want to create these staleness rules. And then similarly, you want to create these orphan rules. What are the relationships that are critical for managing your infrastructure? All of these will then feed back into the health dashboard. And that is what's going to be helping you effectively and proactively manage your CMDB health. All of this is driven by scheduled jobs. And so this is also something that you're going to be able to manage how often you're running these jobs, how often you're pulling these metrics. And so this is also something you as an organization would want to define, just because at the end of the day, this is reporting. This will help you to report back up to leadership. And so this is also an important aspect of it. Now, for any of our impact customers that are out there, these aspects are also something that our impact offerings cover. And so we have an accelerator for tuning up your CMDB and also CMDB governance. So I would implore you to go work with your account team and better understand these offerings, because they will help you get a head start and make sure that you're starting off on the right foot. And at the end of the day, you want to start off strong, but you want to start off correct, because that from then on, your governance will sort of have to fit into place. So implore you to take a look. So let's take a look at health inclusion rules, right? So we've talked about this. A lot of you in the chat have said, you've got millions of CI records, which is great. You've got a ton of data. But at the end of the day, you're probably not looking at or managing all the data within CMDB. It's an impossible task, right? And so what you do want to do is define what are the data points that matter to you. And so that is where health inclusion rules are going to be very important. They allow you to limit the measurement, that metric, down to the core classes you're interested in, right? So we have this example of an application service, right? We've got your web application, your servers, your VMs, and you got a ton of infrastructure, and you may not really want to focus in or hone in on all these different attributes, sorry, all these different components. And so we want to go in and circle in and define, okay, we care about the application service. We care about the servers. We care about the VMs, right? These are more often than not your principal CI classes. These are also the things that we want to manage from a health perspective. This is where you're going to use your health inclusion rules to define that. And then this is going to feed back to your health dashboard. And so now you've got a dashboard that's measuring and reporting on things that you as a business collectively agreed on, right? And so when we talk about, your health scores have gone down, they matter because you as an organization have identified these CI classes as important to the business, as important to the processes. And so when these metrics drop below your thresholds, this will then motivate your different stakeholders to actually go in and start doing things that they need to correct and get your health scores into a good spot. And so I keep harping on the people aspect, but I hear so many complaints, right? Because hey, our CMDB is in a bad space. Why? Because you've got one person that's responsible for it all. Doesn't work that way, right? And we want the right people involved because when you start identifying things proactively, who's going to be responsible for fixing these things? It's going to be the stakeholders. It's going to be your network and infrastructure team, your IT service team, et cetera, et cetera. So make sure you get them involved early. Moving on to required and recommended fields. Once again, these are the fields that are being inherited from your parent down to your child classes. And so you want to identify what are the fields that matter to you. You want to identify these fields because they're gonna be applied across the platform, right? They're going to be used across different processes, like we mentioned, change management, incident management. And so one of the things that we typically recommend is building out automation so that these fields are automatically populated, right? So for example, in an incident field, I'll have customers tell me that they're manually adding these fields, right? Every time an incident comes into the service desk, they're going in, reviewing the information and saying, oh yeah, this is affecting this application, or this is affecting this particular CI, right? Build business automation behind this, right? Make your life easier, because at the end of the day, this is all gonna help you then report back up to the leadership level. And so building automation for things like fields is going to be very important. It's going to save you a lot of headache into the future. And then it's going to be the compliance aspect is going to be very important. And so building your compliance audits down to the required fields is important because required indicates it's mandatory. You've defined what mandatory or required is. And so if you're doing compliance activities, make sure you're tying it back to the required fields. And then, you don't have to go in and set those fields as mandatory, just to make sure that your sort of processes and automation are working smoothly. And then lastly, right, recommended fields, they apply to your health metrics. We talked about this, but they may also provide value in troubleshooting, right? So if you've got, you've got an indicator telling you that you're not capturing effectively the required fields or recommended fields, maybe this is an indicator of your discovery process. How have you set up your discovery? How have you set up your service graph connectors, your IRE rules, right? Are they capturing your required fields, right? Have you gone in and taken a look at that? All of that is going to be defined, but you're going to be able to identify them proactively through the CMDB Health dashboard. And then last point should be a process, people, or automation, but just emphasis on the people aspect. Don't forget them as they're important to this.
Hey, Kandark, just a quick time check.
Yeah.
Give or take 7 to 10 minutes here, and then we
Yeah,
can
we're
finish up
almost
with
done.
cool labs and resources.
Awesome. So lastly, we're going to talk about staleness and orphan rules, right? CMDB, we want to make sure the data is kept up to date. So with staleness, we're talking about old data. Make sure you go ahead and define what stale and old means for your business. This could be, you could stay out of the box and say 60-day time limit, which is what is by default. But the following questions you want to ask yourself are, how often are you discovering them? Do you have dependencies on external sources, right? So for example, servers are discovered weekly, they have a 21-day time limit, right? Your staleness rules will be driven off of them. And so make sure you're taking these things one step at a time. And then in the similar vein of things with orphan rules, you want to define what relationships are important to your CMDB, and then also the processes that rely on it. So for example, you have an application stack, how much of the data being captured in your CMDB is going to be important for troubleshooting, right? Important for change management, right? And then based on that, you will then go in and define orphan rules, so that you're making sure you're only targeting the things that are important to processes and workflows within the platform and the business. Okay, so I'm going to switch things over a little bit, and we're going to talk about some other functionality that allows you to manage data, tools that are available to you. So oftentimes we hear about duplication. Duplication is a big challenge for a lot of customers. And so within the platform, we have an application that allows you to manage duplicates. The platform can help you identify duplicates, and then we have an interface that can then help you reconcile and manage duplicate CIs through what we call deduplication tasks. And so these could be manual or semi-automated or fully automated based on how your deduplication process has been identified. But the idea is you identify duplicate CIs, and then you have some sort of process in place to actually go in and remediate and fix them. Once again, this involves also having the right people in place. There's other aspects of remediation that you may want to consider. And then the general rule of thumb is, you're going to have some sort of manual process that you may identify. So you want to understand how are you manually remediating things like orphan CIs, or, where recommended required fields are missing. What does the process look like for you today, even if it's manual? And then from there, you want to go in and start building out workflows, semi-automation. You review and optimize, and then you go and fully automate, right? And so now you've got, remediation tasks that are being identified, but you've got workflows built in place so that you can automate and semi-automate so that you're actually able to go and fix these things effectively and very quickly. Now, with the introduction of generative AI, we're also releasing new features and functionality that rely on our Now Assist functionality. So an example of this is for managing duplicate CIs in a conversational aspect. And so we're able to, look at duplicate CIs, CI tasks, and then also leverage agentic AI to help manage and remediate. I'm happy to share some more information at the end, but something just to take a look at. We're continuing to review and release new AI functionality as we continue and develop on the product. Similarly, we have an agentic use case for governance. You have the ability to leverage our governance AI agent to suggest improvements from a governance aspect, right? So, for example, we're able to review CMDB health metrics, review lifecycle information, CI lifecycle information. We can also go in and perform tasks such as creating certification tasks, et cetera, et cetera. And so now we're removing some of that manual effort, putting in the hands of agentic workflows, just to make the aspect of managing the CMDB that much more efficient. Okay, and then I'm gonna quickly shift over into just two more things, and then we're gonna end off with insights. So some of you may be familiar with this, but within the platform, we have something we call the CMDB and CSDM Data Foundation dashboards. So the CSDM and CMDB Data Foundation dashboards are a place for you to go and review your CMDB from a perspective of best practice. So let's start with the CMDB Data Foundations dashboard. The CMDB Data Foundations dashboard here will allow you to review your CMDB and the data within it from the perspective of best practice, right? So this is looking at what the baseline is, what the recommended steps are for managing your CMDB. And so this is once again a great place from a governance aspect to manage the CMDB and look at it from the perspective of how ServiceNow intends for you to do things. In a similar fashion, We have the CSDM Data Foundations dashboard. So this is where we're looking at the CSDM framework and then looking at your CSDM journey and saying, okay, where are we and how are we doing with our CSDM adoption? And how are we doing at it from the perspective of best practice? Where are places where we need to be a little bit more proactive? Looking at things where you may have information that's missing. Let's go ahead and be proactive and remediate, right? The idea being we want to stay as close to what best practice is as defined by ServiceNow. And then lastly, on the perspective of reporting and insights, there's often an ask of how we query information and how we pull data and actually review the data within the CMDB. The beauty of the ServiceNow platform, and specifically related to the CMDB, is we have complete traceability, right? We have complete traceability into sort of date and time information, sources, previous values, as Suhaib alluded to, with configuration files and looking at what's changed within our environment. But we also have information like related records, incidents, looking at changes against CIs, proposed changes. All of these things are how you drive value to the organization, right? Being able to report on unplanned or proposed changes against a service will then help you manage in the event of an outage, right? Being able to understand why an outage occurred, maybe because you were able to understand what sort of changes occurred against an application or a CI. And so the idea is, these relational data pieces are going to be very effective in trying to drive value for the rest of the organization. And then we're almost done. A couple slides here. Looking at the CMDB Query Builder, once again, a very powerful feature. Now we're looking at building out queries in order to save and reuse them for things like reporting, building out dashboards for more complex queries. We could support CMDB and non-CMDB as well, but the idea here is look at the most commonly asked questions when it comes to reporting on the CMDB data. You can build out these complex queries and then leverage them in dashboards and reports. So now you can have a place for stakeholders in the organization to always have a place to go to get visibility. And then lastly, in the same vein of things, you are also able to leverage the workspace, the service operations workspace, as an example, to browse data that resides within the CMDB. So a great example of this is your service desk team, right? Your service desk team, when they're working on incidents or major incidents, they may need to have visibility into the CI level data to understand, information or attributes against an application or a service. And so for them, being able to browse everything within the workspace itself is going to be very effective. And so we make it very easy for folks that may not be deeply involved with the CMDB itself, still have access to the information they need to do the job that they're required to do.
So I'm going to go ahead and post in the chat right now, and you're going to see a couple things. So first, you're going to see a link to the digital sales room, and that is really your one-stop shop for everything that we have for you. We'll keep updating that and probably be done updating it tomorrow, close of business. We'll get the recording that we have from today. We'll get that cleaned up and uploaded there. We have the survey. If you can do that, we would really appreciate it. It makes us, or it gives us insight into how we can keep improving these. You'll have all of the content. We've separated them into each of the three sections. And then what else? Oh, you'll have the labs, the most important. Do you mind going back one slide? So we had at the start of the webinar about 300 attendees. So initially I'd only booked 225 instances. I went back. There was one more group. We added a few. So that will be coming soon. So what you can do here, it doesn't matter about this lab group. Just ignore that number. But what you will do is you'll click on that link, and then when you click on the link, it will be, you'll need this code and this student password. Each of those are very specific to those links, and there are only 75 instances in each of those groups. So just be mindful. If you don't get an instance today, if we run out of the 175, the other 150 are finishing provisioning right now. So I'll take away this box and upload the new doc. to the digital sales room. But what you'll see if you go to the next slide, this is what that registration page will look like. So you'll put in your first name, last name, an email address, and then you'll put in that student password and that code. And so once you get those, then you are good to go. On the digital sales room too, you will see all of the lab guides. You'll have 3 lab guides, and we'll go through those here in just a minute. One thing to note, oh, there we go. Awesome, Cantor, appreciate it. Yeah, so what we have here, the slide decks from today. We have the lab instance. Maybe do a quick refresh on that. If you could not click on that first link for the labs, they're still provisioning. Just would help us out a little bit. Scroll down one more. Cool, there we go. I hit it, I'll unhide that as soon as those finish up. But you have all of the guides in here. Do you mind clicking on like lab 1, the guide to lab 1? Perfect. So each of these, you'll have 3 lab guides. They'll kind of go through different things. The first one is really around service management and change management. The second lab goes into AIOps event management. The third is around really service maps, how to build those through the wizard, and then tag-based mapping, and then building out a dynamic CI group. So you get a lot of different things. And then the third one is really all around governance. So setting up the health dashboard and CAI retirement. All right. Let's finish up. We have 4 minutes left, so let's go into some resources. Go to the next slide here. This is really the main page here of everything. Yeah, there we go. It has a ton of great links, probably all the links that you could ever want from ServiceNow, from knowledge, events, our support, Now University. If you didn't know, something that changed this year that was really cool were all of our on-demand courses through Now University, where you can learn things like Common Service Data Model or CMDB or Discovery. Those are all free. So really great for each of you to take advantage of. Couple other things in here. Now Create. This is really like a process guides. They are changing this to now best practices on December 12th. So just a heads up, it will automatically redirect you, but this is really where you can get a lot of great like blueprints on how to configure your instance to best practice. Next, we have all of those videos that we personally recommended, or the courses through Now University. They are all hyperlinked here for everyone. And what else we have in here? Oh yeah, the Data Foundations dashboards. These Candar hit on this, that if you are a customer and you have now, if you have guided impact or any of the impact support packages, these are some of the accelerators. I've linked them here so you can take advantage of those. And yeah, how you can get a hold of your account team. So if you are new to ServiceNow, just go to our ServiceNow.com page, click on Talk with an Expert, and that will directly connect you back to our sales team. If you are a current customer, you probably know who your account team is, so feel free to reach out to us. And I think that's where we are ending. We have a survey. Would really appreciate everyone's feedback, but thank you so much. Thanks to all the presenters. Great session. I think a lot of people were able to get their questions answered. So appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you.